Hey guys! Tonight we drift into a world of candlelit chambers, scratchy linen shifts, and expectations so high they could snap a rib. You're in a place where beauty isn't just admired, it's demanded. You barely open your eyes and already feel something wrong. Tightness. An aching squeeze around your middle. A breath caught in your throat. That's because you've woken up in a medieval noblewoman's bedroom, and someone, probably a handmaid named Beatrix, has already begun lacing you into something stiff, something cruel, something exquisitely fashionable. This is not a time of soft pajamas or elastic waistbands. You live in a century where appearance equals status, and status is survival. Your body is not entirely your own. It's a canvas, a billboard, a battlefield. And yes, you're going to be uncomfortable, maybe even faint. You probably won't survive this, if not from the social pressure, then from the actual lead in your makeup. But don't worry, you're just here for the story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing near a carved oak bedpost, one hand resting on the cool wood, the other gripping your stomach, not in pain exactly, but in protest. The corset's drawstrings have been yanked, one pull too many. It's made of linen, stiffened with glue, and reinforced with whalebone or, if you're really unfortunate, splinters of actual wood. There's no give. You breathe in shallow little sips now. It's fashionable to look like you haven't eaten in 3 days, and honestly, you probably haven't. Whether due to fasting, cost, or just the fear of bloating under all this lacing, meals are often modest or skipped entirely. Outside, the sun hasn't yet risen, but your day begins anyway. That's what nobility demands, to suffer in silence and silk. The corset is just the start. Over it, you'll wear a chemise, a kirtle, maybe a surcoat if it's cold. And let's not forget the layers of petticoats and an embroidered gown, stiff enough to stand on its own. You weigh more fully dressed than a small sheep. You glance into a polished metal mirror, not glass, not yet, and try to admire yourself. Your waist is pinched, your spine straight, your chest pushed forward in an uncomfortably obvious way. Good, Beatrix mumbles through a mouthful of pins. You look like a lady now. And that's the thing. In medieval Europe, to look like a lady meant to look unnatural. The body must be reshaped, masked, elongated, subdued. You're not supposed to appear strong. Muscles are for peasants. Sun-kissed skin, a horror. That means you work outside. Real beauty, they say, is pale, soft, and fragile, like a porcelain doll with anxiety. Historians still argue whether corsets in the early medieval period were truly bone-tight, or if we've projected later fashions onto earlier centuries. But there's no question. Women's bodies were under scrutiny. Dress codes were written by men and enforced by women. You'd better play along. There's one small comfort. Everyone smells a bit funky.
Bathing isn't a daily ritual, and deodorant, as you know it, doesn't exist. You do have herbs, though. You tuck a sachet of lavender under your arms and chew a clove or two. There. Now you smell like a decorative cupboard. As the day begins, you walk carefully. The corset makes bending tricky. Sitting is an art form. You lower yourself like royalty or risk splitting a seam. When you finally take a seat in the hall, you can barely eat. Your stomach is compacted into a shape not conducive to digestion. Instead, you sip watered wine, nibble on bread, and hope no one notices your occasional wince when breathing. Outside your manor walls, peasants wear loose tunics, comfortable belts, and shoes made for walking. Inside, you, the ideal woman, must barely seem human. Still, there's power in this discomfort. In this warped way, you're signaling wealth. You don't need to move quickly. You don't carry water or haul grain. Your posture says it all. I am important enough to suffer. A tiny laugh escapes you. It hurts your ribs, but it's worth it. Later, when the guests arrive, you'll walk the hall like a sculpture, carefully, perfectly. You won't sweat, even though the fire roars. You won't slouch, even if your back aches. You'll smile, demure and distant, like a saint in a stained glass window. And when it's all over, Beatrix will help you undress. The laces will come undone, and for a moment you'll breathe deeply again. Your skin will show angry red marks where fabric pressed too hard. And you'll lie there, in your linen shift, wondering what it would feel like to just be. But that's not the point, is it? You're not here to be free. You're here to be admired. And admired you are. You're still catching your breath from the corset ordeal when someone brings in the measuring tape. Not for a dress, for your waist, again. There's an obsession here, an invisible ruler that everyone, mother, nursemaid, neighbour, holds against your body. The goal is simple and yet maddening: to shrink, to vanish almost. Your body must exist, but just barely. They say a perfect waist can be encircled by a man's hands, and not large hands either. It's a standard passed around like gossip, whisper soft and deadly. And so each morning you inch closer to the ideal. A silhouette so narrow it suggests you might snap in two if someone sneezes too hard near you. You sit by the fire, hands folded over your stomach, pretending it doesn't ache. The other girls in the household are already trading tips. How to sleep in a corset, you don't unless you must. How to hide bruises from too tight bodices, which undergarments help tuck in the unwanted parts. No one questions the standard. You either meet it or you don't get married. And not getting married is, well, worse than bruises. You shuffle into a side chamber where the seamstress works, pins in her mouth, eyes already narrowing as she examines you like a dress form with complaints. Still too much curve here, she mutters, pressing her hands around your ribcage. We'll take in the stays another half-inch. That half-inch feels like betrayal. The next corset is stiffer, harder, made with whalebone from the actual sea. How romantic. Imagine a creature the size of a wagon, harvested so your ribcage can be pushed closer to your spine.
Progress, they call it. You endure the fitting, arms lifted as the strings are pulled, the pressure rising in waves. It starts at the belly, creeps upward, then settles like a stone behind your lungs. You can't cough. You can't laugh. You definitely can't eat. And yet, you look perfect. At least, that's what they say. One of the younger maids claps her hands. "You're shaped like a chalice," she exclaims, as if this were a compliment. In medieval symbolism, the chalice is sacred, a vessel, a container, a passive receiver of holy things. See the metaphor? Historians still argue whether the obsession with tiny waists reflected religious piety, fertility symbolism, or just good old-fashioned class anxiety. But whatever the reason, the fashion spread like a rash across courts and kingdoms. You try walking. It's more of a glide now. Your hips can't swing the way they used to. Your breath comes shallow. A deep breath would tear the seams. Even your voice changes. You speak in lighter tones now because anything deeper might move your diaphragm too much. This is what they mean when they say beauty takes effort. It takes discipline. It takes fewer meals, more binding, and an iron will not to collapse. Though honestly, fainting is fine, encouraged even. It makes you look delicate, breakable. Men love that. You make your way to the hall again where the lady of the manor is seated. Her corset is even tighter than yours. You can tell by the way her eyes dart between guests while her shoulders remain rigid. She's survived 5 pregnancies, and yet still fits into a bodice made for a girl half her size. You wonder how. Then she laughs, a short musical sound, like a bird startled by its own song. "You'll get used to the pain," she says under her breath. "Eventually, it stops feeling like you and more like the version of you they expect." You nod, though you're not sure what that means. You sip a little wine, which feels like swallowing, with a neck brace on. Every motion is controlled, not because you're elegant, but because the alternative is injury. At night, when you're finally out of the contraption, you examine your torso. Bruised, red, compressed like dough, too long in a mould. There are little welts along your spine where the boning pressed. You can see where your ribs didn't quite agree with the design. Still there's pride. You look the part, you pass the test, you curl into bed, breath returning to full depth at last. But the echo of the pressure lingers, like the phantom weight of a crown you never asked to wear. And here's a fun fact, to lull you further. Some noble women had corsets so aggressively tailored that their internal organs would shift over time. Yes, shift. The liver, the stomach, even the lungs, all nudged out of alignment by decades of fashion-forward discipline. It's unclear whether doctors of the time understood this or if they just shrugged and prescribed more lavender water. Even now you can't help but smile. If the nobles of today complain about high heels and shapewear, what would they make of this medieval masterpiece of compression and compromise? The night deepens outside. Somewhere, a church bell tolls softly in the distance. You exhale slowly, stretching your spine now that you can. It pops in protest. You're reminded, again, that your body remembers everything, every inch lost, every breath denied. And you wonder, just a little, if anyone will ever love you without the corset, without the performance. But that's a thought for another night. Right now, you have to sleep. The next fitting is at dawn. You rise slowly, joints creaking like floorboards in an old chapel. Sleep didn't quite do its job. Your ribs still feel hugged by an invisible serpent, and your hips are stiff from staying so unnaturally still beneath layers of skirts. Today promises no relief, because today you're expected to walk the city streets, and not just in any shoes, Chopin's. Beatrix enters carrying the monstrosities like sacred relics, their tall, towering, wooden platforms covered in brocade and velvet, some reaching 18 inches high. These, she says, are for the market walk. You look at her like she's just handed you a pair of stilts and asked you to do ballet. Market walk? Oh, yes, she chirps, clearly not the one who has to wear them. Very fashionable in Venice. Some say it keeps the gowns clean. Others say it's a modesty thing, elevates you above the grime and the glances. Then with a wink, but really it's just to show off. You slide your feet in with trepidation. The leather straps dig in immediately. The soles are curved wrong for comfort. It's less like wearing shoes and more like balancing atop the legs of an upside-down table. You shuffle toward the doorway and instantly feel your ankles scream in protest. You're not alone. Women across Europe, and particularly in the wealthier port cities, adopted Chopin's to elevate both status and literal height. Some reached absurd proportions. Rumour has it a few brides wore platform shoes so high they needed attendants on each arm just to move without falling. Like fashion-forward scaffolding, you take a step, then another. The stone hallway wobbles beneath you, not because it moves, but because your body doesn't quite trust itself. The Chopins make your entire silhouette sway with every motion, like a chandelier in a mild earthquake. Every step becomes ceremonial. Outside, the air is sharp with the scent of horses, whetstone, and frying onions from the street vendor's cart. You smell life, real life, and for a moment, you envy the barefoot children chasing one another through puddles. No corsets, no elevation, just dirty toes and laughter. But you are a lady. You walk slower now, part performance, part survival. The long hem of your gown drags behind you, and you try not to let it catch on cobblestones. Beatrix follows at a respectful distance, but you know she's watching closely, ready to dive in if you tumble. She's had practice. The market square bustles with energy. A butcher hollers about fresh lamb. A weaver displays yards of dyed fabric. A barber surgeon is trying to convince someone that leeches are the answer to everything. And here you are, gliding above it all like a very fashionable stork. People notice, heads turn, not just because you look stunning, though let's be honest, you do, but because you look fragile. And in a twisted way, that's the point. These shoes, this posture, this entire performance says, I am too important to walk normally. Historians still argue whether Chopin's were more practical or symbolic. Some believe they started as a way to avoid the dirty streets and evolved into status symbols. Others think they were always about power, just not the kind you could use to run or jump, the kind you had to endure. You spot another noblewoman across the square. Her Chopin's are higher than yours, easily 2 inches taller, She's flanked by two servants, her hands lightly resting on their shoulders for balance. She nods to you, a subtle smile on her lips as if to say, "You'll get there." It's a race no one admits they're in. You reach the lace vendor's stall and finally, blessedly, lean on the edge for support. Your calves tremble, your toes have lost feeling, but you've made it. A servant rushes to bring you a stool, a short one. You'd topple from a tall one. You sink down, awkwardly, carefully, one knee at a time. The lace is fine. You pretend to examine it while covertly massaging your ankle under the folds of your gown. Beatrix, ever discreet, offers you a sugar plum. You chew it, slowly, grateful for the moment of quiet sweetness amid the aching chaos. And then, because no day is without its drama, someone falls. Not you, thankfully, but another girl, barely 15, judging by her smooth face and two large chopines, has misstepped near the fountain. She's sprawled on the stones, dress hiked scandalously, one shoe dangling from her foot like a fallen crown. Gasps ripple through the crowd. You want to help. You start to rise. But then you remember your own precarious elevation and sit back down. Someone else helps her. A stable boy, maybe. Her mother rushes in, red-faced, swatting at him with a handkerchief for daring to touch her daughter. The girl limps away, tears in her eyes. Her day is ruined. Her dignity cracked like the buckle on her chopine. You can't help but sigh. This is the reality behind the elegance. Beneath every polished surface lies a bruise. Later, back at the manor, Beatrix unlaces your boots and gently removes the chopines. Your feet are swollen, the back's rubbed raw. Shh! She tucks under her breath and applies a bit of calendula salve. The coolness seeps into your skin like a balm for the soul. You ask her quietly, "Do men have to do this?" She laughs, not cruelly, just knowingly. "Oh, my lady, if men walked in shoes like these, the streets would be paved in velvet." You both laugh, and it hurts, but not just physically. That night you fall asleep with your feet elevated on pillows, hoping the pain fades by morning. And maybe, just maybe, you dream of walking barefoot, not in shame, not in filth, but in freedom. A freedom that doesn't need height to feel high. You wake to the gentle rattle of wooden shutters and the persistent chirping of birds that clearly don't care how sore your calves still are. There's a moment, brief, delicious, where your body forgets its obligations. You stretch under the linen sheets, legs tangled and spine curved, feeling like something almost human. Then Beatrix knocks and it begins again. Today's torment isn't from footwear or corsets. It's higher, literally. She's brought tweezers. You blink, confused, until you remember. Today is hairline day. "Your forehead's looking a bit crowded," Beatrix murmurs, as she pulls up a stool and begins unrolling her tools like a surgeon preparing for delicate work. "We'll fix that. Fix it." You sit obediently as she begins plucking, slowly, methodically, the soft baby hairs at the top of your forehead. The goal isn't neatness, it's distance. You're widening your forehead, creating the illusion of a higher brow, a more celestial dome. The ideal? A forehead so tall it could display a short poem. You wince. "Ow. Beauty requires sacrifice," she chirps. You're beginning to notice that's the motto of your entire life. This is no eccentric quirk either. Across Europe, particularly among the nobility, women in the late Middle Ages embraced a beauty standard that demanded exaggeration. A towering forehead implied intelligence, virtue, and refinement. It was a canvas. The bigger the space, the purer the soul, or so the poets claimed. Some women plucked so far back they nearly touched the crown of their head. Hairlines became cliffs. Some even used lime or arsenic-based pastes to burn the follicles away permanently. Convenient if you ignore the skin damage and mild chance of disfigurement. Historians still argue whether this was driven by religious iconography, where saints were often depicted with exaggerated foreheads, or simply a case of beauty trends spiraling into madness. Probably both. The medieval mind loved metaphors and a high forehead. That was a spiritual skylight. The tweezers pinch again. You inhale sharply. Can't I just wear a veil today? Beatrix tuts. And hide your progress. Never. You peer into the metal mirror. Already your face looks subtly different. Not better exactly, just more correct. The shift is barely noticeable to an untrained eye, but in courtly circles it's everything. One lady once fainted after discovering her maid had plucked a quarter-inch too far. Another blamed a thinning patch on witchcraft. You try to think of anything else. Beatrix, perhaps sensing your restlessness, begins humming a lullaby from her village. It's soft, wordless, almost enough to make you forget that your face is being forcibly edited like a manuscript with tweezers instead of ink. After the grooming comes the styling. Hair is power, but in this century it's also paradox. Loose hair is wild, sexy, dangerous. Married women must cover it. Maidens may show it, but only in carefully orchestrated waterfalls of braids or pinned curls. Nothing too rebellious. You can't win, but you can style. Today, Beatrix arranges your hair into a double-horned structure called a hennin. She winds your locks into stiff cones on either side of your head and wraps them in gauzy veils. You look like a fashionable ram. "Lovely," she whispers, stepping back. You glance sideways in the mirror. It's odd, but mesmerizing. You've become a creature of silhouette. Your face framed by fabric, your forehead gleaming like polished marble, your eyes downcast just enough to seem modest, but not dull. The truth is, you could start to like this. Except it hurts. Not just the plucking, but the pulling. The tight braids strain your scalp, tugging at the roots with every movement. You nod too quickly and a spike of pain zings behind your ears. You sneeze and the pins shift dangerously. Beauty, again, has barbs. Outside, the town square fills with life. Women in simpler garb carry baskets of vegetables, their hair loose or covered by plain kerchiefs. No one's sculpting their foreheads. No one's balancing veils or fussing over symmetry. But they are being watched, because even outside nobility, beauty standards trickle down like hand-me-down gowns. A milkmaid may not have shopinins, but she still pinches her cheeks for colour. A washerwoman might hide her thinning hair beneath ribbons, not religion. The performance changes, but it never disappears. You take a slow walk through the garden, feeling your scalp throb with every step. The lilies are in bloom. You pause near the fountain and catch your reflection in the water, distant, foggy, prettier than real. And then it happens. A single breeze lifts your veil, just a little, a whisper of wind, and suddenly two court ladies who were pretending to admire the roses glance your way. Their eyes travel upward, settle on your newly widened forehead, and narrow ever so slightly. Is it envy? Approval? You're not sure, but you know this. They noticed. And in this world, that's the whole point. Back in your chamber, Beatrix begins undoing the pins. Your hair falls in aching ropes. The follicles feel sore. You imagine them protesting, filing complaints in some imaginary scalp council. But beneath it all, there's pride. You endured. You achieved the look. You played the part. As you slide into bed, the pillows cool and soft. You realize that even if your head still tingles, the pain has faded to a hum. Your reflection haunts the edge of your memory, not as you were born, but as you've been made. And tomorrow? Tomorrow the eyebrows go. You wake to a tickle, not in your throat, though the damp stone walls don't help with that either, but on your cheek. Beatrix is already there, dabbing something onto your skin with a soft linen pad. It smells sharp and oddly sweet. Vinegar. With a hint of metal. You blink. She smiles. Just a little ceruse, my lady, to freshen your complexion. You sit up slowly, remembering your forehead is freshly plucked and still sore. Ceruse? Oh yes, she says, as if discussing lavender water. White lead mixed with vinegar. Very popular in France. The Queen herself uses it. You glance at the small pot she dips into. Inside is a thick, creamy paste the colour of candle wax. It clings to the cloth like glue, and when she strokes it across your cheek, it feels cold, then heavy. Your skin resists it at first, but eventually it gives in, becoming paler with every pass. You are becoming ghostly. And that's exactly the point. Pale skin is everything. In medieval Europe, it's the ultimate status symbol. Not because it looks ethereal, though it does, but because it proves you don't labour outside. You don't sow grain or scrub floors. You stay indoors, preferably near tapestries. The paler you are, the richer they assume you must be. So women, noble and aspiring alike, pursue paleness with a determination normally reserved for crusades. They use powdered ground pearls, chalk, even flour. But the most prized method, ceruse, a potion of purity and poison. Historians still argue whether users of ceruse understood the danger or simply accepted the price of perfection. After all, the side effects didn't show immediately. It took weeks, months, sometimes years for the skin to flake, for the eyes to dim, for the nausea to start creeping in. But once the compliments began, oh, it was hard to stop. You sit quietly while Beatrix smooths the mixture across your face, neck, even the tops of your ears. Your natural skin tone fades beneath the layers. You're turning into porcelain, doll-like, unreal. Do I look sick? You ask, half joking. Beatrix beams. You look divine. You resist the urge to sneeze again. The paste is drying fast, tightening slightly as it sets. It smells faintly like old pennies and something chalky, like a classroom no one's cleaned in years. You're not finished yet. Next comes the rouge, made from crushed cochineal beetles if you're lucky, or red ochre if you're not. Beatrix dabs 2 polite circles on your cheeks, then a smear on your lips. The effect? A fragile bloom of colour in an otherwise deathly palette, like roses frozen in snow. You catch your reflection in the polished silver hand mirror. The transformation is startling. You don't look like you look like art. A person trying to look like a painting of a person. There's a strange power in that. Still, the itch begins almost immediately. The lead reacts with your sweat, clogs your pores, and irritates the delicate skin around your eyes, but you dare not touch it. Smearing would be disastrous. Beatrix leaves briefly to fetch your head veil, and you take the opportunity to breathe through your mouth and pray the room doesn't get any warmer. At court, this face will be admired. The lady with the most pallor wins. Her face, they say, is as smooth as ivory. Her lips ripe like blood oranges, her eyes dim just enough to suggest mystery, or possibly just low iron. There are fringe treatments, too. Some women trace blue lines along their cheeks or hands with indigo ink to mimic visible veins, evidence of fine, thin skin. And if they're truly daring, a drop of belladonna in each eye to dilate the pupils. It gives you a dreamy, seductive stare and possibly permanent blindness. You haven't gone that far yet. Beatrix returns and places a sheer veil over your head, letting the pale glow of your face peek through the gauze like a relic behind glass. She adjusts the fabric, eyes narrow with focus. "There," she says, stepping back. "You're ready." For what? You wonder. To impress? To endure? To slowly poison yourself with a smile? Out in the garden, you join the other ladies for afternoon repose. They sit in arranged clusters under fruit trees, sipping herbal wine and discussing embroidery, politics, and who wore what last Sunday. You keep your movements slow, deliberate. Any sudden turn might crack the paste. One woman leans closer and whispers, "You look almost too pale, like you've seen a ghost." You blink, slowly. "Maybe I have." Laughter bubbles around the circle. You've passed the test, but later, back in your room, you stare again into that mirror. The image looks more puppet than person. When you scrub your face with vinegar and cloth, the paste clings stubbornly. It takes 3 rinses to remove most of it. And underneath, a redness, a stinging tightness, a tiny patch of rash near your jawline. You lie back on your straw-stuffed mattress, eyes on the wooden ceiling beams. Your skin itches, your lungs feel tight, and your lips taste faintly of chalk and beetle. And yet you've never been more praised. Maybe that's the cruelest trick of all. In this world, The more you erase yourself, the more they adore you. You wake with a strange taste in your mouth, like iron and cinnamon and something vaguely herbal. At first you think it's the leftover beetle paste from yesterday's rouge, but no. Beatrix appears with a knowing smile and offers you a tiny twig wrapped in muslin. "Time to freshen the breath, my lady," she says cheerfully. "Open wide." You oblige, and she begins dabbing your tongue with a paste that smells like clove oil, and, oddly enough, honeyed wine gone slightly sour. You gag a little, reflex, but she pats your chin like you're a child and assures you it's all the rage in Paris. The Queen's own physician swears by it. Welcome to the medieval mouthwash experience. In an age without toothbrushes as we know them, women developed elaborate rituals to keep their breath as sweet as their court manners. Forget mint strips and fluoride. Instead, you're chewing fennel seeds, rinsing with rose water, and rubbing your gums with sage leaves, sometimes even powdered coral. And if you're truly fancy, cinnamon-soaked sponges kept in little silver boxes tucked discreetly into your sleeve, or pearl-sized sugar balls infused with anise and clove, sucked slowly like a holy lozenge. You swish the rinse once, twice, then spit it into a basin, lined with dried mint leaves. The scent that fills the chamber afterward is not terrible, certainly better than what's wafting from the garderobe down the hall. Still, medieval breath freshening wasn't just about hygiene, it was a performance, another way to signal refinement. After all, only someone who didn't sweat or stink or belch openly could be truly virtuous. A mouth that smelled like lilies and wine. That was a moral mouth. Historians still argue whether these elaborate breath rituals were rooted more in superstition than science. Many believed foul breath came from a corrupted stomach vapor and could cause or be caused by sin, so naturally women took it upon themselves to smell like virtue. And when all else failed, you chewed on myrtle leaves and hoped no one leaned in too close. After the rinse, Beatrix presents you with a tongue scraper, carved from ivory, its edge dulled by years of careful use. You run it gently over your tongue, feeling the layer of grime lift. It's not painful, but it is intimate. There's something oddly grounding about scraping one's tongue before courtly poetry and embroidered flirtations. Next, she dabs a bit of sage oil salve along your gums. It tingles, numbs slightly. Your smile now carries a faint herbal sharpness, as though your very teeth were seasoned. You step out into the solar, the morning light spilling over tapestries and cold tiles. The chambermaids are lighting incense, not just for scent, but for purification. The idea is that good smells ward off bad spirits. And nothing is more spiritual, apparently, than a woman who smells like a spice rack. You take a seat near the window, folding your hands in your lap as another lady arrives. She's new to court, wearing a slightly out-of-fashion headdress, but her breath, judging by the sharp hit of vinegar and rosemary, is impeccable. She nods at you, you nod back, and just like that you've passed another invisible test. There are subtler signals too. The type of herbs you use says something about you. Mint, practical, cinnamon, sensual, clove, worldly. One duchess famously chewed candied angelica before speaking to the bishop, hoping it would make her appear more holy. It worked. He offered her an extra blessing and a seat at the high table. Not bad for a plant that smells like licorice and church incense. Later, at the feast, you test your own aroma by sipping wine and leaning discreetly toward your neighbor during a joke. He chuckles, then smiles faintly, his eyes lingering. You can't help it. You mouth cinnamon. He mouths back clove. This is what flirting smells like in the 13th century. The meal unfolds with roasted birds, stewed leeks and sweetmeats, but you're cautious. Garlic is the enemy. Onions? Only if you plan to whisper to no one all evening. You pick at honeyed turnips and suck on a quince slice, choosing your bites like a chess player moves pawns. Beatrix is never far. She occasionally offers a scented linen square for you to dab at your lips, not just to clean them, but to refresh the scent. Some noble women even carried dried orange peels in pouches, to rub on their teeth between courses. It's not about masking filth. It's about crafting an illusion of sweetness, of innocence, of barely touched by the earth elegance. And in this world, illusion is everything. You return to your chamber that evening, breath tinged with fennel and wine, tongue raw from ritual. You collapse into bed with the lingering taste of lavender sugar on your lips and the distant memory of Beatrix whispering, "A lady's words must smell like her soul." You didn't understand that at first. Now, maybe you do. You awaken with your lungs pressing gently against the inside of your corset again. The morning air feels thick, not from weather, but from layers of fabric, duty, and expectation. Beatrix is already bustling at the foot of the bed with something slung over her arm, something long, something sharp, something strung with laces. "Oh no," you murmur. She smiles brightly. "Wasp waste day," you groan. She wasn't kidding. Today is all about silhouette, and more specifically, control. You know the drill. Cinch until you can't quite finish a sentence. The tighter the waist, the more refined the soul, or so the painters and poets say. The undergarments come first, a linen chemise to protect your skin. Then a stiffened bodice lined with whale baleen, because why should whales keep their dignity if your figure can gain some of it? Beatrix begins tightening the laces. You hold the bedpost, knuckles white. 1 pull, 2, 3. The pressure moves inward like the walls of a shrinking tower. "You're doing wonderfully," she coos. "You're lying," you gasp. She laughs. "Yes, but only a little." You feel it now, the slow compression of ribs, the rising heat in your cheeks. Breathing becomes a conscious act. You have to sip air in through your nose and release it in delicate, ladylike wisps. No panting, that's for peasants and dogs. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror and blink. You've become geometry. Angles and curves, a tiny waist, a lifted bust, shoulders back, spine like a board. This isn't anatomy, it's architecture. And it's considered beautiful. But why? Historians still argue whether the idealized wasp waist was a direct product of courtly love culture, religious symbolism of the hourglass, or simply another means of disciplining the female body into submission. Some even suggest that this obsessive waist training was a competitive social marker, like bidding for attention in increasingly extreme ways. Whatever the reason, the results are impressive and occasionally catastrophic. You take small, calculated steps to the great hall, the corset forcing your stride into an elegant shuffle. Your hands rest lightly on your waist as if to say, "See, it's this small, marvel accordingly." You're met with nods, admiring glances, a few envy-laced smiles from other ladies who secretly loosen their stays after 2 hours. But not you, not today. You're all in. At court, one woman boasts that she once fainted during a dance, and the Duke himself carried her from the floor. Another claims her corset was so tight her voice permanently changed pitch. A third confesses she had her maid lace her backwards so she couldn't reach the knots herself and wouldn't be tempted to loosen them. You sip from a goblet of watered wine, the pressure making each swallow feel like threading a needle. Food? A dangerous proposition. You settle for candied almonds, tiny enough to nibble without risk. Then comes the walk. Down the great corridor, your back straight as a candlestick, you parade beside the tapestry-covered walls, careful not to brush against anything. You feel every rib, every heartbeat. The corset doesn't just shape your torso, it directs your behavior. You don't laugh loudly in a corset, you don't shout, you don't run or trip or sprawl or exhale in relief. You hold your breath at parties, you sip instead of gulping, you glide, you float. And the men? They cheerfully comment on how graceful you look today. One even offers a compliment that makes you want to cough. You look like you've barely any bones at all. Well, you certainly feel like it. Later, in the privacy of your chamber, you stand before the mirror and let Beatrix untie the laces. Inch by inch, breath by breath, the garment loosens. Your torso expands as though remembering its true shape. You gasp, then choke, then laugh. A real, raspy laugh from somewhere deep in your lungs. It hurts, but it's yours The red lines across your back and stomach are deep. Angry. Your skin bears the memory of constraint. Some women wear those marks like badges. Others hide them beneath perfume and powder. Beatrix rubs a cooling balm into your ribs. "Just think," she whispers, "you've gained a quarter inch today." "Lost," you correct. "No," she says, "gained attention." Ah, so that's the currency. The tighter you lace, the more visible you become. Not for what you say or know or do, but for how efficiently you disappear behind beauty. As you lie in bed, lungs still sore, you imagine what it would feel like to take a walk in the forest in nothing but a shift, to breathe deeply without restriction, to sit on a mossy rock and eat a whole loaf of bread without anyone watching your waistline rise, but you know that's a fairy tale. In real life, your waist must whisper before you ever speak. You don't even flinch when Beatrix enters your room carrying a bundle of cloth and what looks suspiciously like a small leather strap. You're used to it now, being turned into a project, a sculpture, a devotional icon that just so happens to breathe. She holds up today's pièce de résistance, a woolen girdle embroidered with tiny red crosses, each one meant to ward off some specific affliction of the womb, heart, or soul. You eye it warily. "This one's from a convent outside Canterbury," Beatrix explains, smoothing it out reverently. "Stitched by nuns. Holy thread, they say, helps with fertility, or chastity, or both, depending on how it's tied." That doesn't clarify anything. She begins wrapping it snugly around your waist, over your chemise, and under your outer dress. The wool is scratchy. It itches instantly, like wearing a prayer that resents being touched. She threads it in a specific crisscross pattern and knots it with a whispered Latin phrase. "There," she says, satisfied. "Protected." Protected from what, you wonder? Sins of the flesh? Bad spirits? Unwanted glances? Or worse, wanted ones? Welcome to the strange and itchy world of girdles, the not-so-secret accessory of the medieval woman. More than a fashion item, they were often woven with superstition and medicine, embroidered with charms, religious symbols, even tiny lines of scripture. Some were soaked in wine, wrapped in herbs, or consecrated by priests. They weren't just about shaping the body, they were meant to influence its destiny. Historians still argue whether these girdles had more of a spiritual role or a social one. Some believe they were used as talismans to influence fertility, protect unborn children, or suppress carnal urges. Others argue they simply filled the medical gap where no remedies existed. After all, when you don't understand how bodies work, you tie a ribbon around them and hope for the best. Beatrix adds another layer, a leather belt this time, stiff and creaky with brass fittings. It's worn low, resting awkwardly on your hip bones. "This one," she says proudly, "was worn by my cousin during her 8th labor. She swears it made the baby obedient." You blink. "The baby?" She says it came out smiling. You decide not to ask follow-up questions. The rest of the day is spent in a peculiar state of tension. You are cinched, strapped, and spiritually reinforced. The wool girdle chafes. The leather belt clinks with every step. You feel like a knight, except your sword is modesty and your armor is woven judgment. At the convent down the road, the sisters wear simpler versions, plain strips of linen with crosses inked on them, worn against the skin beneath their habits. Some contain relics, tiny splinters of saints' bones, or dried petals from roses blessed by a bishop. The idea is that holiness can seep through fabric. That purity, if worn close enough, becomes contagious. You sit through a long mass with the girdle digging into your ribs and the belt pressing awkwardly when you kneel. You try to focus on the Latin, on the incense, on the echo of the choir, but all you can think about is how this feels like wearing a sermon. One of the ladies next to you leans over and whispers, "Did yours come from Chartres or York?" "Canterbury." She nods solemnly. "Ah, good for fertility. Mine's for resisting temptation." You glance down at her girdle, which is partially visible beneath her overly modest bodice. It has tiny rose vines stitched into it. You're not entirely sure temptation is the only thing she's resisting. Back at the manor, Beatrix helps you remove the girdle for the evening. It comes off slowly, like peeling away an obligation. Your skin bears its mark. Faint red impressions where the wool pressed too hard. You exhale deeply, for the first time all day. But Beatrix isn't done. She holds up a different girdle, this one, silk, bright red, with no crosses. This, she says, is for other nights. You raise an eyebrow. Wards off gossip, she says innocently, and sometimes helps with seduction. You don't ask which saint signed off on that. The truth is, these girdles represent more than medieval mysticism. They are a reminder, worn under your clothes, close to your skin, that you are never truly alone. Someone is always watching, a neighbour, a priest, a husband, a god, a rumour. You lie back in bed, your waist free at last, your body loose and soft and for once, unshaped. The sheets feel cooler against your skin without the extra layer of wool and intent. You imagine tossing the girdles into the fire, watching them curl and crackle and vanish in smoke, but you know you'll wear one again tomorrow, because protection, real or imagined, is sometimes easier than rebellion. And because in this world, even your undergarments are expected to perform. There's a chill in the air this morning, and Beatrix greets it the same way she greets most things, by layering. She arrives with a pile of garments that seem far too many for one person to wear. Linen, wool, velvet, even something that rustles faintly like straw paper. She lays them out on the bed with the air of a general preparing for battle. Today, she announces, we dress to impress and suppress. You blink sleepily. Suppress what? Your shape, mostly, but with dignity. Ah, of course. You've entered the era of bodily contradiction, where women's fashion both hints and hides, praises the flesh while burying it in fabric. Some days you're meant to look like a ripe pomegranate, other days a decorative curtain. Today, it seems, you're leaning into layers. Beatrix starts with the basics, a clean chemise, already cool from the morning air, then a petticoat, then another, then a stiffened kirtle, its hem weighted with hidden stones so it sways regally when you walk. Over that, a surcoat with wide, gaping armholes that show just enough of your underlayers to whisper intrigue, and finally, yes, finally, a heavy woolen overdress embroidered with your family's crest, a red falcon eating what you hope is a pear. Each layer has a purpose. Some create volume, some hide imperfections, some signal wealth. But all of them, they serve as a kind of armour. Historians still debate whether medieval layering was purely about modesty, or whether it evolved from a practical need to adjust warmth and status simultaneously. The truth likely is both. You dress like you're going to a feast and a snowstorm and a confessional at the same time. By the end of it, your movement is reduced to a gentle shuffle. Sitting? Possible, but only if you perch. Bending? Not without assistance. Breathing? Still permitted, but only in short, thoughtful intervals. Do I look like a tent? You ask, turning to the mirror. Beatrix beams. You look like royalty, which apparently is code for wide, layered, and very, very warm. You make your way to the great hall for a midday gathering, your skirts sweeping behind you like a bridal train. Servants scatter, not because you are feared, but because the dress takes up nearly half the corridor. You pass another lady whose sleeves trail 3 feet behind her, each lined in mink. She nods at you with the solemn dignity of someone carrying small animals on her arms. This is court fashion, formless and excessive, and absolutely the pinnacle of sophistication. There are trends, of course. One year it's the hourglass, the next it's the column. The ideal body shifts like a mirage, and women follow, even if it means sewing lead weights into their hems or padding their hips with sawdust. Some ladies even fake pregnancy. Yes, actual padded bellies carefully tied beneath their gowns to suggest fertility and court favour. One duchess famously wore hers to a wedding, only to remove it later when the gossip had safely multiplied. Beatrix once told you that fashion isn't just about attraction, it's about position. How you stand, where you sit, whether you can cross a threshold without assistance. It all says something, and in layers like these you say, I am so important that I don't need to move. You settle into a window seat and let your gown billow around you like a fortress. The fabric holds warmth. The embroidered birds on your sleeves preen in the candlelight. Somewhere under all of it you still exist. Across the room, a woman walks past wearing the opposite silhouette. Tight-laced bodice, narrow sleeves, no petticoats. She looks like a breath held too long. You trade glances, and in that moment you both understand. You're playing the same game on different difficulty settings. Later in the courtyard, children chase one another in nothing but tunics and hose. Their freedom makes your ankles ache. One girl pauses to stare at your dress, eyes wide. Is there a person in there? You smile. Sometimes I wonder. That night, as Beatrix helps you undress, the garments come off like armor being stripped from a tired night. Each layer releases warmth. Each unlacing brings breath. When you're down to just your shift, your body feels exposed, like a peeled apple. I missed this part, you whisper. Beatrix nods. We all do. She rubs your shoulders with lavender oil and hums an old lullaby about a lady who got lost in her own gown. You lie back, sore but light, remembering the freedom of movement, of skin-touching air. And you promise yourself, just for a second, that one day you'll walk barefoot in the garden, no laces, no crests, just linen and sky. Until then, layer up, my lady! Fashion waits for no one. You're halfway through your morning porridge, 2 spoonfuls, very carefully measured because no one wants a bloated waistline under 6 layers, when Beatrix enters, holding what appears to be a small sack of dried leaves and something that smells faintly like crushed lavender and wild thyme. You squint. Tea? She shakes her head. Bust enhancement. You nearly choke. Today, it seems, is all about the chest, because in the endless medieval oscillation between modesty and display, there were times like now when curves were in vogue, but only specific curves, controlled curves, curated curves, and if you were not naturally blessed with the required bosom, you padded. Beatrix begins her lesson by opening a small wooden box that smells like a forest floor. Inside, dried rosemary, fennel, hops, and something she calls blessed thistle. It's part of a tea blend said to encourage fullness. You take a tentative sip. It tastes like what you imagine a barn smells like after a rainstorm. Not terrible, just earthy, too earthy. While you sip, Beatrix lays out 2 small linen sachets filled with soft herbs, fennel seed and lamb's wool. For your bodice, she explains. Tuck them in, high and centered. You stare at them. Are we building a bust from scratch? She shrugs. Just sculpting what the saints forgot. This is not unusual. In certain periods, especially during the later Middle Ages and early Renaissance, fashion favoured a lifted, rounded bust. Gowns were tailored to push upward, creating a shape both maternal and alluring. The challenge, of course, was that corsets flattened, so unless you were naturally abundant, you had to cheat. And cheat they did. Women stuffed bodices with everything from wool to cloth to soft bread crusts. Yes, bread. One French noblewoman allegedly commissioned leather bust pads shaped like apples and perfumed with jasmine. She called them her chest offerings. You hope she never sat too close to the fireplace. Historians still argue whether these enhancements were purely for attraction or if they carried symbolic meaning, suggesting fertility, wealth, or even spiritual generosity. Some art scholars point out that religious paintings of the Virgin Mary often emphasized the chest, not for eroticism, but for nurturing iconography. And so fashion followed faith in its usual tangled way. You finish your tea and submit to the herbal pillows. Beatrix ties them into place with practiced speed, adjusting the drawstring of your underkirtle to lift and secure everything upward. The result is convincing. You glance in the mirror. Oh, you murmur, that's effective. Your silhouette has changed again. The bodice of your dress now frames your chest like an altar, central, slightly exaggerated, but undeniably part of the architecture. Beatrix pins a brooch at the neckline and nods with approval. You're fashionable, she says, but not scandalous. I praise. You step into the hall, posture upright, chest forward. Your movements have to be a touch more calculated now. The herbal pads shift if you lean too far or laugh too hard. But it's worth it. The glances you receive are different today, less curious, more admiring. You pass a young knight who drops his bread crust. Whether from awe or clumsiness, you'll never know. At lunch, you sit with other ladies in waiting. One sighs dramatically and admits she's been using sheep's wool soaked in rose water, but it keeps attracting bees. Another confesses she once used 2 dried pears, tied in with ribbon. Only until the dance was over, she assures. You try not to laugh. The sachets jiggle slightly and you immediately straighten. This, of course, goes both ways. There were times when the fashion flipped entirely, demanding flattened chests and hidden curves. Then women bound themselves. They wore compression bodices that restricted growth and disguised shape. A few even used strips of wet cloth that dried hard across the ribs. So whether you had too little or too much, your body was always wrong in some era. Beatrix tells you later that she once met a woman in the city who sold miracle balms made from crushed snails and goose fat, guaranteed to increase bust size within a fortnight. She was arrested, Beatrix says, but not before she sold out her entire cart. You wonder if the goose fat helped, or if it just gave people hope. At night, when the gowns and sachets come off, you feel strangely deflated, both literally and emotionally. The shift sags against your real shape, soft and natural, and you trace your own collarbone with tentative fingers. It's not that you disliked how you look today, it's just you're starting to forget what you looks like. Beatrix senses you're quiet. Too much? She asks gently. You shrug. Just a lot. She sits beside you and begins massaging a lavender balm into your chest, supposedly to soothe any tension, though the smell alone is medicine enough. Tomorrow, she says, we can go simple. Modest neckline, no sachets, just you. You nod, but you're not sure which version that is anymore. And that, you think, might be the point. In a world where your body is always in flux, lifted, bound, padded, flattened, it's easy to become an echo of what others want to see. You close your eyes and breathe, soft and slow, letting the herbs fade from your skin and the mirror grow dim in the candlelight. You rise to a dim grey morning, the kind that hums with dampness even before the rain arrives. The stone floor feels cold beneath your feet as you shuffle toward the fire, hoping Beatrix hasn't yet begun the daily ritual of turning you into someone more acceptable. But no, she's already there. And today she's brought something enormous. It's red, it glitters faintly, and it looks like it might consume you whole. This, she says proudly, is the new gown, direct from Bruges, 5 yards of velvet, lined with fox, sleeves like tapestries. You'll be swallowed alive. You blink at it. I'm not sure I'm ready to be swallowed. Oh, don't be dramatic, she chirps. You'll look divine. Welcome to the world of the dress that eats you, where fashion isn't just restrictive, it's utterly engulfing. Layer by layer, she begins dressing you. The undergown goes on first, followed by an interlining to help with structure. And then, heave by heave, the velvet overgown, so thick and heavy it nearly pins you to the floor. You wobble slightly under its weight. There we are, she says, pulling the final sleeve into place. You're now technically mobile. Technically, you mutter, as the fabric settles around your body like a polite avalanche. This is not an outfit, it's a commitment. The sleeves alone are a statement, draping several feet past your hands, edged with tiny bells that tinkle every time you breathe. And the skirt? It's a movable tent. You wonder briefly if you could house a small goat under there, or hide from court altogether. But despite the drama, there's a logic behind it. In the medieval mind, size often equaled status. The more fabric you wore, the more wealth you displayed. Velvet, brocade, silk, all costly, all scarce. A gown that took up space meant a woman who didn't need to move quickly or at all. Historians still argue whether the excessive layers were more about luxury or modesty, but most agree. This was fashion as architecture. The body became the scaffolding on which wealth was draped, folded, and stitched into art. And sometimes that art was ridiculous. You remember one tale Beatrix loves to tell, a duchess in Burgundy whose dress sleeves were so wide she once accidentally set them on fire reaching for a candle. The servant who extinguished her was knighted. Another court rumour whispers of a noblewoman who wore a 12-foot train and required 2 children to walk behind her, holding it aloft. One tripped, the other sneezed, and the entire court watched her topple like a felled tree. Fashion, it seems, is a dangerous sport. You step carefully toward the mirror. Your silhouette is unrecognizable, vast and regal, like a walking mural. The embroidery glows faintly in the firelight, golden thread forming tiny vines, birds, and fantastical beasts. Your waist is still cinched beneath it all, but now it seems almost incidental. You are no longer defined by your figure, but by the sheer volume of your presence. You sit, barely, on the edge of a cushioned bench. The skirt piles around you like an obedient dog. You try lifting your arms to reach for a goblet. The sleeves dangle halfway to the floor and knock over a bowl of figs. Beatrix doesn't flinch. Gracefully, she reminds you. Right, gracefully. You shift your wrist just so, raising one pinky and barely lifting the goblet with the tips of your fingers, all while keeping your elbows glued to your sides. It's like drinking wine while trapped inside a bell tower. At court, the compliments arrive quickly. "You look radiant," one woman says, eyes gleaming with equal parts admiration and envy. "Like the Queen of the Dawn," another murmurs. A knight bows so deeply he nearly loses his balance. You've outshone the tapestry behind you. You glance at the tapestry. It's 3 panels of unicorns battling dragons under a blood moon. Not bad. But the praise comes with a cost. You can't walk quickly. You can't descend stairs without holding on to Beatrix and 3 handmaidens. You can't leave a room without the entire affair turning into a minor parade. And heaven forbid you need to relieve yourself. The gown must be removed in stages like a castle being deconstructed brick by brick. By evening your shoulders ache from the weight, your knees throb. Your scalp itches beneath the heavy headdress that matches the gown, scarlet velvet embroidered with tiny glass beads that seem determined to get caught in your hair forever. When at last you return to your chamber and Beatrix begins the long, slow process of undressing you, you sigh with something like reverence. One layer slips off, then another, and another. Your body re-emerges slowly from the folds, like a statue being unwrapped. You stand there for a moment, barefoot, hair loose, wearing nothing but your chemise. You feel small again, soft, real. Beatrix kneels to gather the velvet heap into a basket for brushing. "Tomorrow," she says. "Maybe something simpler?" You nod. "Maybe something I can walk in?" She smiles. "We'll see. There's a blue brocade we haven't tried yet." Of course there is. You crawl into bed, muscles sore, chest light, spine still adjusting to the freedom of movement. You think of the dress, resting now like a sleeping beast in the corner of the room. And as your eyes close, you can't help but imagine it dreaming too. Dreaming of the next woman it will wear. The sun barely clears the treetops when Beatrix appears holding a veil so sheer it's nearly invisible, and a length of fabric the colour of old parchment. Her eyes are bright with purpose. That's never a good sign. "Today," she says softly, "you're going to radiate virtue." You exhale. "Do I not already?" "Not enough," she replies, lifting the fabric. "Today you will be cloaked in virginity." You blink. "That's a big ask for one outfit." She shrugs. "It's court." And just like that, you're pulled into one of the more complex rituals of medieval fashion, dressing to prove purity, or at least fake it convincingly. Beatrix begins with your veil. Not just any veil. This one is crafted from fine linen, light enough to drift with your breath. She pins it to a delicate coif beneath your headdress, making sure it drapes low across your shoulders, framing your face like a chapel window. You glance at your reflection. You look soft, mysterious, mildly apologetic for existing, exactly the point. In the medieval world, modesty is not a virtue, it is the virtue, and women are judged by how well they conceal themselves, physically, emotionally, socially. To display your hair, your neck, or your opinions too openly is to risk being seen as unruly. Loose hair equals loose morals, bare shoulders, bold intentions. Historians still argue whether these dress codes originated from the church or whether society simply used religion to justify control. Probably both. Sermons preached against the slippery slope of vanity, where a single uncovered braid could lead straight to damnation, or worse, scandal. You're wrapped now in layers of piety. A muted underdress, a high collar, sleeves that cover everything down to your knuckles. Your shoes are soft-soled and silent. The only skin visible is a small, tasteful oval of forehead, already pre-cleared by yesterday's hairline ritual, and the tips of your fingers. You look like someone who's never made a mistake, or had a thought too loud. Beatrix steps back and nods, satisfied. You're perfect, modest, like a window in a cathedral, beautiful, but only through distance. You sigh. The day's event is a small gathering at the manor, a visit from a bishop and his entourage. You're expected to glide, not walk. Speak, but not too much. Smile, but only gently. It's exhausting. At the breakfast table, you take tiny bites of poached pear, chewing with your mouth closed, eyes lowered. One of the younger girls tries to make a joke about the bishop's moustache, but her mother pinches her knee under the table. The lesson is clear: no laughter before noon, and none that shows teeth. Later, during the bishop's lecture on the moral decay of Italian courts, you try not to fidget. Your veil keeps slipping forward, obscuring your vision. You feel like you're living inside a thin curtain. At one point, the edge of your coif tickles your ear, and you flinch. A lady to your left mistakes it for emotion and hands you a handkerchief. You accept it gratefully, wiping nothing from your eyes. This is how you perform modesty. And it is a performance. Because you know what's underneath. You remember the velvet gown, the bust pads, the scent of clove and honey. You remember the days when your figure was celebrated and your hair coiled like a crown. But today you are a whisper, a symbol, a statue in a niche. At one point, the bishop asks the assembled ladies to reflect silently on their sins. You do. Mostly you reflect on how itchy your veil has become. You're not alone. One girl near the back has tugged her sleeve down so far her fingers have disappeared. Another is quietly mouthing the names of saints like a rosary loop. A third, perhaps the boldest among you, has allowed a single ringlet of hair to peek out from beneath her hood. Scandalous. Still the bishop smiles upon the room, clearly pleased. Such gentle spirits, he says. A room of lilies. You try not to laugh. Lilies with opinions, you think. Lilies with blisters from corsets. After he leaves, the mood shifts instantly. The veils come off like smoke. Hair is unpinned. One girl fans herself furiously, cheeks pink from holding her breath for an hour. Another lets out a groan and kicks off her slippers. "Lilies!" someone snorts. "You should have seen us last midsummer." You giggle. Beatrix clucks her tongue but doesn't stop you. Even she looks relieved. Back in your chamber, you tug at the veil, feeling your scalp breathe again. The linen falls to the floor like a discarded promise. You pull off the coif, run your fingers through your flattened hair, and let it fall wild around your shoulders. In the mirror, you see yourself for the first time today. Not a saint, not a statue, not a lily, just you. And for a moment that feels holy enough. You wake to a scent you can't place at first. Earthy, musky, and just a little alarming. It's not the lavender soap Beatrix usually favours, nor the clove breath rinse. No, this smells more like a barnyard on its best behaviour. Beatrix soon enters with a triumphant grin, holding a tiny glass vial. "Today, she announces. "You're going to smell rich." You sit up slowly. "I thought I was rich," she laughs. "Not gold rich."
"Musk rich. This will be a strange day. Welcome to the world of medieval perfume, where smelling like a flower was optional, but smelling like civet glands was the height of courtly success." Beatrix uncorks the vial, and the scent deepens. It's strong, sweet in the way a compost pile is sweet after a long summer. She dips her finger in and dabs the tiniest amount behind each of your ears. "There," she says. "Now you smell like Florence." You're not sure if that's a compliment or a cry for help. Perfume in the Middle Ages was not just about personal preference. It was political, religious, sometimes even medical. In an age where water could kill you faster than plague and bathing was rare at best, scent was power. A woman who smelled of roses and resin? She was clearly above the world of labor and livestock. Historians still argue whether perfume was used more to mask bodily odors or as a kind of olfactory armor, a way to keep disease at bay through pleasant smells. The theory was that foul air bred illness, so wearing pleasant scents might just preserve your health and your reputation. And thus musk. Civet, ambergris, and musk were considered the most prized scents, extracted from animal glands, whale intestines, and deer follicles. The more exotic, the better. The more expensive, the more respectable. If you didn't smell faintly like the inside of a well-travelled spice box, were you even trying? Beatrix moves on to your wrists next, anointing you with something sweeter, rose oil infused with sandalwood. This part is more pleasant. You inhale slowly and feel your senses settle. Beneath the musk there's something soft, human, calming, but it doesn't last. She finishes with your hair, combing through it gently with a wooden brush dipped in orange blossom water. Then she tucks tiny sachets of dried violet into the folds of your sleeves. "For when you gesture dramatically," she explains, and pins a pomander to your girdle. It's a small, ornate ball filled with clove-studded wax and dried marjoram. With each step, it will swing slightly, releasing a wave of garden-scented power. You're basically a walking apothecary. You descend to the garden where today's court gathering is taking place. Immediately, heads turn. You can't tell if it's the perfume or the pomander, or the way you glow like someone who's been dipped in 12 oils and a pinch of sass. A noblewoman leans in to greet you and subtly inhales. Her eyebrows rise. "Musk?" she asks. You nod, trying not to look apologetic. She fans herself once. Brave choice. Across the courtyard, two women debate whether ambergris pairs better with cinnamon or myrrh. One claims she once wore a balm that made her smell like the Virgin Mary in a spice market. Another swears by a bath in wine and sage, though she admits she fainted halfway through. It's a strange world where scent equals status, but it works. You pass a scribe who immediately bows and says, "You smell like myrrh and memory, my lady," which may be the oddest compliment you've ever received, but flattering nonetheless. At lunch, Beatrix carefully avoids letting your sleeves drag through the stew. "One spill and you'll smell like onions for a week," she warns. You nibble on sweetened almonds and sip rosewater. The perfume, though strong at first, has mellowed. It now wraps around you like a soft whisper. Familiar, almost soothing, until the sun hits just wrong and the civet makes a comeback. You wince. The woman beside you coughs politely. Beatrix appears instantly, pressing a fresh sachet into your palm. "Peppermint," she whispers, "for emergencies." You slide it into your sleeve and make a mental note. 1 dab of musk is enough. That evening, back in your chamber, Beatrix helps you undress. The pomander is emptied. The sachets are tucked into a cedar box for airing. Your wrists still carry traces of sandalwood. Your neckline smells faintly like a garden that hosted a deer fight. You sit at your vanity, hair down, eyes soft with fatigue. "Do I smell good?" you ask. Beatrix thinks for a moment. "You smell like someone they'll remember." That's enough. You crawl under the blankets.
skin warm, scents lingering like echoes. In this world, even your presence leaves a trail. The fire's already burning when you wake, casting soft shadows on the walls of your chamber. Beatrix is unusually quiet this morning. She stands at the window, comb in hand, staring at your reflection in the glass more than at your face directly. "Today," she says gently, "we honor your hair." You stretch beneath the covers warily. "That sounds vague." She turns. "It's time you learned how to wear holiness, and you realize today is not about perfume or corsets or musky veils. It's about your crown, not of gold but of hair." She begins by brushing it slowly, carefully. 100 strokes, she says, like a prayer. The comb is carved from bone, smooth with age and scented faintly with rosemary. Each stroke seems to lift something, dust, thought, yesterday's lingering mask. Your hair is long, as it must be. Medieval women were expected to keep their locks as a symbol of virtue, fertility, and obedience. Cutting it short? That was for widows, nuns, or punishment. But even when it was hidden beneath wimples, veils, or coifs, hair meant something, and today you will wear it, not disguise it. Beatrix divides it into sections, weaving it into 2 heavy braids that curve over your ears and are coiled across your head like wreaths. She tucks the ends under a transparent veil, then pins a crespin, a fine net made of gold threads, over it all. It glints like sunlight caught in spiderwebs. "There," she murmurs, pious but radiant. You look in the mirror and pause. You don't look modest exactly. You look sacred. In the medieval imagination, hair was a paradox. It symbolized beauty, temptation, and chaos when loose, like Eve in Eden. But bound and veiled, it became sanctified, a visual sign of obedience, a frame for humility. Saints were drawn with flowing locks, but real women had to keep theirs hidden, because real women were suspicious. Historians still argue whether hair-covering laws came from religious texts, or if they simply became convenient tools of control. In some regions, married women were required to cover their hair in public. In others, young girls wore theirs in braids until marriage, when they could bind it more tightly, because, apparently, wedlock made your scalp morally dangerous. Today, yours is both displayed and contained. A courtly compromise. Beatrix adds small touches, tiny silver pins in the braid folds, a blue ribbon threaded through the crespin. Blue for purity, silver for silence. These things have meaning whether or not anyone remembers them. As you walk the hall, your hair becomes the thing people glance at when they think you're not looking. A girl behind you whispers to her sister, "Do you think she prays as much as she braids?" You try not to smile. Another lady leans close and says, "Your head looks like a reliquary," which might be the strangest compliment you've received this week, but not inaccurate. One of the older women, a baroness who's buried 3 husbands, chuckles over her goblet. "Hair like that? Dangerous," she says. "Thank God for veils." You wonder if she means it. There are stories, of course, cautionary tales whispered in corners, of maidens whose loose hair bewitched knights into madness, of witches whose power lived in their curls, of widows who cut their locks and were never quite the same. One woman, it's said, tried to bleach her hair with ashes and vinegar to match the virgins in a stained glass window. She went bald and claimed sainthood. In a way, hair was never just hair. Beatrix tells you later that some girls sewed strands of their own hair into love letters, others plaited it into mourning bracelets. A few even offered it to relic shrines, hoping to earn divine favour, or a husband. You imagine your braid being tucked into a prayer book, left behind on a battlefield, spun into a myth, and then you laugh quietly, because right now it's just warm and heavy on your head, wrapped like a secret only you and Beatrix understand. That evening, as you prepare for bed, she unpins the crespin and peels back the veil. Your hair falls slowly, like a curtain drawn after a long performance. You inhale. The scent of rosemary, dust, and fire smoke rises faintly. Still feel holy? She asks. You nod. A little. She brushes again, slowly, carefully, and with each stroke, the world becomes softer. You lie down with your hair fanned across the pillow like a story told without words. Because in this world, even silence has volume, and even hair has history. You hear them before you see them, the shoop of velvet brushing tile, the occasional metallic clink of decorative buckles against flagstone. Shoes. Today, everyone's talking about them. And you're going to wear a pair that might just end your ability to walk entirely. Beatrix stands at the foot of the bed with a box that looks more like it should hold fine pastries or dangerous pets. Time for shoes that say everything. You raise an eyebrow. Can they say, please carry me? She smirks. No, but they might say, I own land. You sit up, intrigued and slightly afraid. She opens the box with flair, and there they are. A pair of pattens delicately carved from wood, topped with soft leather uppers, and elevated on arches that would make any carpenter proud. The soles look like miniature bridges, functional in concept, keeping your real shoes out of mud and worse, but exaggerated in execution. These aren't just platforms, they're statements. You lift one in your hand, it's heavier than expected. How am I supposed to walk in these? Carefully, she says, and preferably with dignity. You begin the process of dressing. Chemise, hose, ankle ties, and soft leather inner shoes. Then the patterns are strapped on last, laced firmly around the ankles with red ribbons, which Beatrix explains indicate nobility with flair. You try to stand. The patterns tip slightly. You sit back down. This could take a while. Patterns were meant to be practical, elevating the wearer above the filth of medieval streets. But like so many things, they evolved into something else, higher, flashier, more dangerous. Some designs lifted the wearer 5 or 6 inches off the ground. And if your balance wasn't impeccable, well, down you went. Fashion didn't come with a safety net. Historians still argue whether these shoes were truly functional or if they were early medieval performance art. In Venice, Chopin's, cousins to Patton's, were so absurdly tall that women couldn't walk without assistance. Some historians call it status, others call it satire. You call it mildly terrifying. Beatrix helps steady you as you take your first few steps across the room. The floor suddenly feels like an obstacle course. Loose floorboard, risky, stairwell, a death trap, rugs, may as well be quicksand. Don't lift your feet too much, she instructs. Glide. Glide, you ask. I'm on stilts. But you try. You take slow, deliberate steps, legs straight, arms gently outstretched for balance. It feels ridiculous. It looks graceful. That contradiction, that is the medieval woman's walk. In the hall, other women wear their own versions. One has patterns with engraved vines along the arches. Another's are gilded with silver plates that catch the sunlight like polished shields. You notice quickly that all of them are walking with attendants nearby, ready to catch or correct at any moment. One poor girl loses her footing near the tapestry room and topples into a hedge of dried lavender. She pops up red-faced, but laughing. "I'm fine," she says cheerfully, and everyone nods approvingly. At least she fell into something that smells good. The real challenge comes during the procession through the courtyard. Gravel. There is nothing more dangerous to a woman in patterns than an uneven path covered in tiny, rolling stones. You grip Beatrix's arm and begin the descent slowly, feeling each step shift like a question. One wrong answer, and you're on your back with your dignity tangled in your skirt. "You're doing well," she says, through a clenched smile. "I've never respected dirt so much," you whisper back. At the far end of the courtyard, you finally reach the stone terrace without incident. The view is lovely. You feel powerful, tall, slightly ridiculous, and entirely observed. A visiting knight passes and gives you a low bow. "My lady walks like a goddess today." You manage a nod. "Thank you. My ankles disagree." There's a certain thrill to it, the height, the attention, the balance between elegance and impending doom. Your entire body is focused on every motion, every angle. And when you finally sit, slowly, carefully, At the long banquet table, the relief is almost euphoric. Later, as the sun fades and the shoes come off, you feel the tingling numbness in your arches. You roll your feet gently against the stone floor. They're sore, stiff, but miraculously intact. "Survived," you mutter. Beatrix lifts the pattens back into their box. "Barely." She washes your feet in warm rosewater, scrubbing away the dust of the day with a tenderness that surprises you. "You know," she says, "there are women who choose to wear these all day. Just for the look." You tilt your head. "Do they have fewer stairs?" She laughs. You lie back in bed, feet wrapped in linen, body still gently swaying from the phantom wobble of your steps. You think of those shoes, so ridiculous, so regal, and realize they were never about practicality. They were about presence. Because in this world, how you walk can matter more than where you're going. Rain. Soft at first, like a memory, then harder, insistent, drumming against the shutters like a pageant, too impatient to wait for a dry stage. Beatrix stands by the hearth, warming your stockings, while you sit still as stone in front of the polished silver mirror. She holds up 2 swatches of cloth, one crimson, one violet, and studies your face with the analytical intensity of a sculptor. "Red," she decides at last. "You'll wear red today." You pause. "Isn't that bold?" She nods slowly. "Exactly. Today your wardrobe isn't for beauty or modesty. It's for message. In medieval fashion, colour is never just aesthetic. It's a language. And red speaks the loudest. Beatrix pulls out a finely tailored gown made of deep scarlet wool. The sleeves are long and slashed just enough to hint at the linen shift underneath. The neckline, modest, but wide enough to say, "I know you're looking." The hem is edged with tiny embroidered flames, barely noticeable unless someone's kneeling. The fabric is warm, even before you put it on. You slide into it slowly, feeling your body disappear into the hue. Red. Not rose or blush or berry, just red. In medieval Europe, red carried meanings both sacred and scandalous. It was the colour of martyrdom, worn by saints who died for their faith. It was the hue of kings, of seals, of coronation robes, but also of devils, of lust, of infidelity. It could mean passion or punishment, power or danger. Historians still argue whether a red garment marked a woman as bold or simply well-funded. After all, red dye was expensive, often derived from crushed insects or rare roots. The deeper the red, the more costly the statement. Beatrix fastens a gold brooch at your collarbone and steps back. "Now," she whispers. "You're impossible to ignore." You look in the mirror and have to agree. The gown fits like a secret, finally confessed. You descend the manor stairs, slowly, each step echoing like a challenge. In the hall, heads turn, conversations pause, then pick up with a little more volume. One woman eyes your hem and raises a single, suspicious eyebrow. Another offers a tight-lipped smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Beatrix trails behind, proud and unbothered. As you move through the corridors, you remember old court tales of women who wore red to feasts and were promptly gossiped into exile, of others who wore it as a dare, testimony that they could, and no one would stop them. Red has always been a line drawn and danced upon. At midday, you attend a gathering in the solar. The bishop is there again, this time speaking of humility. You fold your hands politely and lower your gaze, feeling the warm weight of your red gown ripple down your arms. He doesn't comment on it, but he looks twice. Someone beside you whispers, "Isn't red forbidden during Lent?" You don't answer. You let your dress answer for you. It rustles when you shift your weight, whispering things you'll never say aloud. Later, during embroidery hour, conversation drifts. One girl shares that her cousin wore red to her betrothal feast. Another says her aunt dyed all her mourning clothes crimson after her third husband died. To confuse the rumours, she explains, no one knew whether to pity or fear her. You nod thoughtfully. That's the thing about red. It never begs for forgiveness. As the afternoon fades, the rain lets up. You walk briefly in the cloistered garden, the wet flagstones dark and slick. Your skirt swishes behind you like a curtain being drawn closed. A boy carrying firewood stares as he passes. Beatrix notices. "He'll write poems about you now," she mutters. Terrible ones, probably, but still. Back in your chamber, the gown comes off slowly. The fabric leaves light indentations on your arms and waist. Your skin underneath is flushed, not from heat, but from the energy of having been seen. Beatrix folds the dress carefully. "We'll save it," she says, "for when you need reminding." Of what? That sometimes, she says, being noticed is its own kind of power. You lie in bed, the scent of wool and rain still clinging faintly to your skin. Red lingers in your mind's eye. Not as danger, not as shame, but as proof that you were present. You were there. The rain may have stopped, but today the sky is stubborn, grey and low, as if sulking. You sit by the window with your fingers resting on the sill, watching droplets slide down the glass. Beatrix enters, carrying a small bronze pot and a cloth bundle. She says nothing at first. That's never good. You eye her suspiciously. "What now?" She smiles faintly and sets the bundle on your lap. Inside, a bone-handled razor, a little jar of beeswax and a soft brush. Next to it, the bronze pot emits a faint herbal steam. "Eyebrows," she says. You groan. "Again?" "Yes," she says, already unwrapping the thread. "And maybe the lashes, if we're feeling ambitious." Welcome to the world of medieval facial fashion, where the brow line is not merely a suggestion, but a sculpted, regulated expression of virtue, and often a complete erasure of character. Beatrix begins with warm compresses to soften the skin. Then, with the care of a miniature blacksmith, she warms the blade and scrapes it gently across your brow ridge. Tiny hairs fall silently into your lap. You resist the urge to sneeze or scream. Plucking was last week. Today is for shaving and sculpting, because in the most fashionable circles, the ideal woman's forehead isn't just high, it's unbroken, smooth, blank, like a scroll no one dares write upon. You stare into the mirror as your brows vanish, stroke by stroke. With each pass, your face grows stranger, larger, cleaner, Beatrix insists. It brings out your eyes. "It brings out my skull," you mutter. She ignores you, and she's not wrong. In the Middle Ages, beauty was often defined by removing distractions. Eyebrows, too expressive, too emotional, too natural, gone, and eyelashes also suspect. A lush fringe was considered animalistic. Better to smooth it all away and let the soul shine through unhindered. Historians still argue whether the trend for plucked brows and bare lids came from religious iconography, where saints were depicted as clean-faced and ethereal, or from courtly paintings where the lack of brows suggested a calm, docile spirit. Either way, it stuck. Some women even plucked their eyebrows so thoroughly they never grew back. One duchess reportedly painted hers on with ink each morning, 2 delicate half-moons that tilted upward like perpetual surprise. You try not to laugh as Beatrix leans in with the wax. She brushes it along the ridge where your brows once lived, then pats it gently into place. "There," she says. "Now you glow." You look in the mirror and don't quite recognize yourself. No brows, no lashes. Your forehead looms like a polished plate. Your eyes, wide and pale, seem permanently startled. And yet, oddly, you look exactly like the women in those illuminated manuscripts. Serene, remote, slightly alarming. Beatrix tilts your chin. "Don't squint, it ruins the effect." You blink, slowly, trying not to blink too much. As you walk the halls later, veiled in gauze but unveiled in gaze, people react differently. One young page stares openly, clearly unsure whether you're noble, holy, or halfway to haunting the manor. An older matron nods at you with approval. "Very correct," she says. "Very clean." And that's the word that keeps echoing. Clean. As if your natural face had been a smudge someone finally wiped away. At the embroidery table, one lady whispers that her cousin once shaved her entire hairline, eyebrows and lashes in one go and was mistaken for a visiting relic. She didn't mind, the woman adds. They let her sit closest to the altar. Someone else leans over and says, eyelashes trap sin, that's what the nuns say. You try not to roll your now very exposed eyes. Later, you hear the boys in the stables talking. One insists that browless women are witches, another claims they're angels, a third says they don't blink, which makes them hard to trust. You blink just for spite. At dinner, no one comments aloud, but every glance lingers half a second too long. Even the steward pours your wine more carefully, as if not wanting to offend your glabrous gaze. By the time the sun sets, you're tired of being looked at, not like a person, but like a portrait missing its eyebrows. Back in your chamber, Beatrix offers to draw new ones on with soot and a thin brush. You decline. Instead, she rubs balm into the raw skin above your eyes. It stings, but the lavender in it soothes something deeper. "Do you like how you look?" she asks gently. You think for a moment. "I look like someone with no opinions." She nods. That's the goal, usually. You lie down, face bare, soul somewhere between amused and resigned. The firelight dances across the ceiling as your lashes grow colder by absence. Tomorrow, you suspect, someone will compliment your graceful clarity. Tonight, you simply hope your face remembers how to feel like yours again. The morning is uncomfortably quiet. You sit at the edge of your bed, staring into the silver mirror, where your own face, still alien without eyebrows, feels like someone else's unfinished drawing. Beatrix arrives as usual without knocking, and today she carries a tiny ivory box. "Something fun," she says, which you've learned usually means something slightly absurd. Inside the box, dots, tiny black ones, a few red, some with shimmer, all made of beeswax, soot, and pigment. Beatrix holds up a needle-fine brush. "It's time," she says, "for your beauty marks." You blink. "You took everything off yesterday. Now you want to put things on?" She grins. "Yes, but these are different. These are chosen." She starts by dabbing a dark circle just below your right eye. "This one," she says, "is for mystery." Then one above your lip. "This is flirtation." And another near your temple. "This one?" "Political allegiance." You snort. "To whom?" "To drama." You laugh softly as she works, steady-handed, careful. Each mark is deliberate, each placement a code. In the medieval courts, artificial moles, called patches or beauty spots, were more than decoration. They were subtle, layered messages. A dot near the eye could mean desire. On the cheek, grace. Near the mouth, temptation. One bold duchess once wore hers on her chin for defiance, and was promptly rumoured to be sleeping with a bishop. These marks weren't only about allure, they were strategy, like fashion's version of footnotes. And in an era where a woman couldn't say everything she thought, these little dots did some of the talking. Historians still debate the origin of the trend. Some say it started as a way to cover blemishes left by illness or cosmetics. Lead-based makeup had a habit of creating the very flaws it was meant to hide. Others argue it was inspired by astrology, stars on skin, mapping one's fate. But wherever the idea came from, it stuck. Beatrix adds a red one next, just a whisper of colour, like a berry dropped from a great height. "This one," she murmurs, "is for sorrow that makes you interesting." You raise your brows, mentally of course, since yours are still recovering. "I'm not sure I need help looking sorrowful," you say. "Not sorrowful," she corrects. "Mysteriously bruised by life?" "Right." You rise and walk to the mirror. It's subtle, but unmistakable. You've become a puzzle. Your skin, your veil, your gaze, everything's still soft and courtly. But the marks, they hint at secrets, stories, desires you'll never name out loud. You step into the hall and immediately feel the difference. People look at you differently, not just admiring, but decoding. A lady squints slightly at the dot near your collarbone. One boy stumbles over his words after catching sight of the mark by your lip. You say nothing. That's the power of punctuation. At lunch, a knight leans toward you and murmurs, "I believe that mark mean you're dangerous." You tilt your head, slow and measured. "Only if someone misreads me." He grins, and just like that, the table around you goes quiet. Later, a maid passes you in the corridor and whispers, "Do they mean anything, the dots?" You shrug, letting the moment stretch. "Only everything." Even Beatrix seems impressed. She tells you that in France some women had entire patch wardrobes, stars, moons, hearts, cut from velvet or taffeta, and glued on with gum arabic. Some wore so many they looked like constellations. One noblewoman even arranged hers in the shape of a crucifix, which was either very devout or deeply sarcastic. Back in your room, Beatrix helps you peel them off, one by one. The skin beneath is smooth, if slightly red. She massages in rose oil and hums as she works. "Do you want to wear them again tomorrow?" she asks. You consider it. The marks felt oddly freeing, despite being decorative. They let you say something without speaking. In a world where your voice is often only decoration, that matters. "Maybe," you say. "Or maybe I'll try silence next." She chuckles. "That's the most mysterious mark of all." You slip into bed with your skin bare, your secrets tucked back into their hidden places. You feel oddly powerful, despite the softness of your form and the simplicity of the moment, because sometimes you realize the smallest dot changes everything. The morning brings sun at last, thin and tentative, like it's not sure it's welcome. You stretch beneath the covers, feeling the light touch your skin with that rarest of things, warmth. Beatrix bustles in, carrying what appears to be a length of lace and a bundle of translucent linen. "No colour today," she says, "only suggestion." You sit up. "I'm not sure I follow." She unwraps the lace and begins arranging it into a frame, delicate, scalloped, and almost invisible. Then she holds up a sheer, whisper-thin veil and lets it unfurl slowly between you. "You," she says, "are going to vanish. Today's ritual, veiling, not for modesty, not even for the weather, but for effect. Because in the medieval world, a woman's veil could speak louder than her face." Beatrix begins by braiding your hair, not tightly, but just enough to keep it from shifting under the fabric. She dusts your cheeks with a bit of chalk and tints your lips with beetroot, just enough to be guessed at. Then she carefully positions the veil, pinning it at the temples so it falls in soft folds around your face. Your features blur, your movements slow. You look into the mirror. You don't look hidden, you look untouchable. This isn't the veil of grief or religion. This is fashion's veil, meant to intrigue, to elevate, to soften everything you are until only a dream remains. Beatrix layers a second veil across your shoulders and fastens it to your collar with a small silver clasp shaped like a rose. "That," she says, "is for structure. But the face one, that's for power." Historians still argue over the veil's exact social function. Some say it protected women from dust and sun. Others insist it was about purity. But at court, everyone agrees a veiled face makes people lean in. It forces attention, it slows interaction, it creates mystery. And mystery, for a woman in a room full of men with swords, is often safer than clarity. You walk through the manor slowly. The veil moves with you, catching the morning light like mist. You're aware of how people react, more hesitant, more polite. They don't greet you with a nod, they bow. At the morning gathering, another lady wears a crimson hood, pushed back to reveal her tightly curled hair. Her gaze flicks to you, then lowers just slightly. Your veil absorbs her scrutiny without reflecting it back. Across the room, a knight speaks to you in cautious tones, unsure whether to make eye contact or wait for permission. The veil controls the pace, the tone, the distance. One older woman leans over to whisper, "I wore mine for 6 weeks once. My husband said he learned more about me then than in the first 6 years. You raise an eyebrow, not that anyone can see it, and she grins. There's an art to moving in veils. Too fast, and they flutter annoyingly. Too slow, and you look spectral. But if you find the rhythm, gliding, turning your head, just so, the veil becomes part of you, like a second expression. One that never twitches, never reveals too much. Beatrix catches up to you in the courtyard and whispers, "Two noble women just argued whether you're shy or deadly." You smile behind the linen. "What did you say?" "I said you haven't spoken to me all day either." You pause at a reflecting pool. The veil softens everything, your outline, your gaze, even your voice when you finally speak. It's like existing in fog. You're still there, but no one's quite sure how far away. And that distance? It becomes protection. There are stories, of course, of women who wore veils for months to protest marriages, of others who seduced lovers without ever revealing their faces. One abbess famously settled a property dispute entirely from behind her veil, without uttering a word. She won. The veil, you realize, doesn't just obscure, it rewrites the terms. Later, back in your chamber, Beatrix unpins the fabric slowly, reverently. She folds it into a square and presses it against her heart. "You wore that like a queen," she says. You stretch your neck, grateful to feel the air again. Your skin tingles. The world seems louder, brighter, almost too much. "You can speak now," she adds with a wink. But you don't. Not yet. You sit on the edge of your bed in silence, hands folded in your lap, feeling the last echoes of veiling still hum beneath your skin. It wasn't just fabric. It was armor, and now, without it, you feel exposed, not vulnerable exactly, but real, which, in its own quiet way, might be even more powerful. You're dreaming of wind, cool and distant, brushing across your skin like memory, when Beatrix rouses you with her usual combination of bustling linen and very little warning. "There's a wedding today," she announces, already rifling through your wardrobe. "We'll need the chastity belt." You bolt upright. "The what?" She turns, holding up a slim band of tooled leather. It glints faintly with polished brass and has an alarming number of buckles. "It's ceremonial," she says with a shrug. "Mostly?" "Mostly. Today, it seems, is not about beauty or mystery or even presence. It's about control, because in this world, a woman's body does not belong entirely to her. It belongs to fathers, husbands, priests, reputations, and sometimes, quite literally, to locks and keys. Beatrix sets the leather belt down gently on the bed, next to your shift. "It's for symbolism," she insists. "You're not actually being guarded. You're just being honored." You look at the belt. You are not convinced, but you step into it anyway. The inner layer is soft, chamois leather, smooth against the skin, but the outer portion is cold, structured. It fastens around your hips and between your legs, buckling at the back where no woman could ever reach herself. Beatrix adjusts the straps gently, checking each hole with an expert eye. "There," she says. "Tidy." You move, carefully. The belt doesn't cut, it presses, not painful, but unmistakable, like a whisper that never stops repeating, "You are not alone in here." In the medieval imagination, the chastity belt, real or rumoured, served many purposes. It was said to protect a woman's virtue while her husband was away, to prevent temptation, to enforce obedience. Some say they never existed at all, that they were fantasies spun by fearful men or fascinated poets. Others argue there are enough references, drawings, poems, iron relics, to suggest some version was real. Historians still argue fiercely. Were they widespread, rare, punitive, playful? No one agrees. But everyone agrees on one thing. The idea of a body under lock and key has always been more powerful than the device itself. Today, you are not the bride, just a guest. But as you walk through the manor in layers of linen and laced leather, you feel the unspoken weight of this performance. Because that's what chastity was, not a state of being, but a state of appearing. Women wore their virtue like perfume, subtle, persistent, performative. Your belt is hidden beneath your skirts, but Beatrix insists that everyone will know, somehow, It's how you walk, she says, how you tilt your chin. It reads, "You tilt your chin experimentally." She nods. Perfect. At the wedding feast, you sit beside a window and sip watered wine. The bride wears white, of course, dyed with chalk and milk. Her veil trails behind her like a vow that never quite gets said out loud. The groom looks proud, nervous, already drunk. There are whispers about her belt, whether it's real, whether her mother insisted, whether the key was passed privately to the groom before the vows. You don't join in, you simply listen, and under your own skirts you feel the slight weight of your own buckled promise. It doesn't make you feel protected, it makes you feel borrowed. At one point during the dance, a lady stumbles and grabs your arm for balance. Her hand brushes against your hip. She pauses, raises her eyebrows slightly. Doesn't comment. The message is received. Later, Beatrix finds you near the gardens. She presses a key into your hand, tiny, brass, warm from her pocket. Only symbolic, she says. You stare at it. Who usually holds this? You ask. She shrugs. Anyone but you. And that's the truth of it. This device, real or not, functions exactly as intended. It reminds you who isn't in control. That night, in your chamber, Beatrix unfastens the buckles with practiced hands. The belt falls away with a soft creak, leaving faint impressions on your skin, loops and lines that fade slowly, like yesterday's restraint. She rubs balm into the marks. You close your eyes. I didn't like it, you whisper. You weren't meant to, she says. You lie down in your shift, legs curled beneath you, body no longer bound but still remembering. The fire crackles gently. Somewhere outside, laughter trails from the last of the wedding guests. And you wonder, quietly, if the only true chastity is the ability to choose when and how you reveal yourself. Not in belts, not in rules, but in knowing you could and choosing when not to. The morning is grey again, but the kind of grey that softens everything, stone, sky, even your mood. Beatrix enters without ceremony, carrying a small earthenware bowl and a strip of linen. You expect a new lace collar, or perhaps another mysterious charm stitched into your petticoat. Instead, she says, time to glow like a saint. You blink. You're not going to light me on fire, are you? She smirks. Only metaphorically. She sets the bowl on the washstand and stirs its contents with her finger. It smells faintly of frankincense, rosemary, and something richer. Animal, but not unpleasant, like the remnants of incense clinging to a monk's robe. Today, she says, we anoint you. You raise an eyebrow, or rather, the skin where an eyebrow used to be. For what exactly? To smell like grace, she replies, as though that explains anything, and thus begins your journey into the odd world of saintly scents. A curious tradition where medieval women rubbed balms, oils, and scented salves onto their skin, not to attract suitors, but to emulate divinity. She dabs the mixture at your temples, behind your ears, along the base of your throat. It's cool, rich with resin, and leaves a faint shimmer. Then she dusts your collarbones with crushed myrrh and covers your shoulders with a sheer chemise that's been soaking overnight in rose water and mint. You're not dressing for court, she says. You're dressing for heaven's foyer. You laugh softly. Will heaven have this much linen? Oh no, she says, but the saints will admire your effort. The truth is, in medieval Christian tradition, saints were often described as having bodies that smelled sweetly even after death. It was a mark of holiness, the odour of sanctity. Their corpses didn't rot. They emitted the fragrance of lilies, cinnamon, or honeyed wind. So naturally, some women tried to fake it. Historians still argue whether this holy scent phenomenon was based in real experience or devotional imagination. But among medieval noblewomen, it sparked a trend, applying scented balms made from beeswax, crushed herbs, and sacred oils before prayers, mass, or even confession, just in case anyone got ideas about your spiritual status. Beatrix ties a filmy white scarf around your shoulders and sprinkles a few drops of neroli water on your sleeves. "You'll smell like you never sinned," she says, which is, of course, the best possible lie. You head toward the chapel, trailing gentle clouds of fragrance behind you. Along the way, a novice monk pauses as you pass. He blinks, startled. You give him a small nod, and he promptly drops his candle. Inside the chapel, the air is damp with incense and stone dust. You kneel near the back, trying not to let your chemise rustle too loudly. A woman beside you glances over, nose twitching delicately. She mouths, "Are you wearing hyssop?" You nod once. She mouths back, "Excellent choice." And for a brief, strange moment, you feel like a celestial body orbiting among mortals. But scent has power. It lingers longer than sound. Even after the service ends, people treat you differently. A steward offers you a seat cushion. A visiting priest calls you child with unusual softness. Even Beatrix seems momentarily deferential, as if she's forgotten she's the one who rubbed resin on your earlobes this morning. At lunch, someone leans over and whispers, "You smell like a reliquary." You say thank you, you think. Later, Beatrix confesses that some women took the practice further, burning holy relics in tiny censers and waving the smoke under their dresses. One lady of Navarre apparently commissioned a perfume made from church incense and unicorn horn dust. It gave her a rash, but the bishop said she radiated humility. You sit in your chamber that night, unsleeving yourself layer by layer, the scents releasing one by one like soft ghosts. The oil at your temples has warmed into your skin. The rosewater on your collar has turned sweet and dusky. The mint on your sleeves now smells like memory. Beatrix brushes out your hair, fingers gentle, face quiet. "Do you feel holy?" she asks. You shake your head. "I feel scented," she smiles. "That's close enough for court." You lie back in bed, the fragrance of saints still clinging faintly to your skin. It's a quiet kind of comfort, a softness you carry alone, beneath the eyes and judgments and fabric. Because in this world, holiness isn't always about what you do. Sometimes it's just about what people smell when you enter a room. The day begins in silence. No rustling skirts, no clattering buckles, not even Beatrix's usual hum. You find her by the window, holding a long, narrow box wrapped in indigo cloth. Her expression is oddly reverent. You approach cautiously. "What's that?" She unwraps it without answering, revealing a hat, though hat doesn't do it justice. It's a tower, conical and absurd, wrapped in gauze and trailing a veil so long it spills over the windowsill. She lifts it gently. "You, my lady, are going to touch the sky. Today you are to wear the hennin, the famous pointed headdress of medieval nobility, tall, impractical, unapologetic. Beatrix helps you sit on a stool while she wraps your hair into a tight coil that balances at the back of your head. Then she straps the hennin over it, tightening the padded base until the cone stands upright, soaring at least 2 feet into the air. It's ridiculous and completely glorious. You look like someone who commands armies of embroidered pillows. She fastens the veil next, gauze thin, snow-white, cascading down your back in soft, rolling waves. When you turn your head, it flutters slightly like the tail of a kite. You look in the mirror. You've become geometry. In the medieval courts of Burgundy and France, the hennin wasn't just fashion. It was status in silhouette form. A woman's social rank could be gauged by the height of her headdress. Some reached 30 inches or more. Sumptuary laws eventually had to cap their size because women were knocking over candles and failing to duck through doorways. Historians still argue whether the hennin was inspired by Eastern turbans, astronomical symbolism, or simply the competitive spirit of noblewomen trying to outdo each other in height. Whatever the case, it became a hallmark of elegance, sophistication, and dangerously limited peripheral vision. You try to stand. The weight shifts slightly. The veil pulls. "Am I supposed to move in this?" Beatrix chuckles. "Technically, yes. Realistically, slower is better." She offers her arm as you begin the slow parade down the corridor. Every step is carefully calculated to keep your head balanced. You pass under a doorway and instinctively duck. Too late. The hennin bumps the beam. Not hard, but loudly. Someone in the next room applauds. In the main hall, the reaction is immediate. Eyes widen. Conversations halt mid-sentence. Even the steward forgets to announce your arrival. You glide forward like a human sundial, the hennin commanding every gaze, like a steeple carried on soft slippers. One woman mutters, "She looks like a bishop's chess piece." Another whispers, "It's taller than her morals." You smile behind your veil. The effect is undeniable. You don't just wear the hennin, you become watched. There is no ignoring a woman who takes up vertical space with that much confidence. At dinner, you can't lean forward. You must sip from the side. You knock over a spoon by mistake and cannot retrieve it. Your field of vision now lives in a triangle pointing forward and slightly down. Beatrix hands you a replacement and whispers, "You're doing very well. Only 2 near decapitations so far." Across the table, a knight raises his goblet and says, "To the tallest woman in the room." You raise yours back. Height is character. Laughter follows, light, indulgent, slightly fearful. Later, you overhear 2 girls debating whether the hennin hides secrets. "She could smuggle letters in there," one says, "or jewels." The other replies, "Or a dagger." You say nothing. Let them wonder. Back in your chamber, Beatrix carefully unpins the veil and lifts the hennin from your head. Your scalp tingles. Your neck feels 20 pounds lighter. Your hair, once coiled tightly beneath the cone, spills out in loose waves. You sit on the edge of your bed, combing your fingers through it slowly. Beatrix places the hennin back in its box, wrapping it with surprising tenderness. "I don't think I breathed properly all day," you murmur. She smiles. That's the point. Because the hennin was never about comfort. It was about commanding space, vertical space, sacred space, space that said, "I am here, above you, noticed, and impossible to miss." You lie back in bed, your neck still adjusting to its sudden freedom. You think of all the women who wore those cones with pride, who ducked through doorways and tilted their heads like queens, who said with every inch, "I may be silent, but I am not small." It starts with a soft scratching sound. You glance toward the hearth, where Beatrix is crouched, grinding something with a mortar and pestle. The scent hits you next. Deep, earthy, and oddly familiar. Something between soil and smoke. You wrinkle your nose. What is that? Beatrix doesn't look up. Powdered mouse bones. You blink. She turns, holding up a tiny porcelain pot. For your skin. Naturally. Today's routine is less about beauty and more about the wild world of medieval skincare, a realm that dances between miracle and madness. Beatrix scoops a small amount of the greyish powder and mixes it into warmed honey and a dollop of duck fat. She dabs it onto your cheek with a small brush. The mixture is thick, slightly gritty, and smells faintly like burnt parchment. "Mouse bones," she explains as she works. "Keep the skin smooth. The honey heals and the duck fat, well, it's just comforting." You smile despite yourself. "So I'm a walking apothecary today." "Always," she says. The medieval woman had to work with what she had, and what she had was creative. Skin troubles, try crushed pearls, or almond oil, or vinegar steeped in rose petals. Pimples, rub them with ashes or basil sap. Wrinkles, bathe in fermented milk. Freckles, bleach them with lemon juice, or, if you're daring, mercury. Historians still debate whether these treatments were effective, symbolic, or just acts of ritual comfort in a harsh world. But one thing is certain. Beauty required ingredients, and many of those ingredients were not what you'd expect. Beatrix moves on to a forehead salve, white clay, boiled lettuce water, and crushed poppy seeds. "This keeps you calm," she says, or at least it looks like it does. You chuckle. She coats your nose with a feather-light blend of goat's milk and powdered alum, which immediately tightens the skin. "Do not smile," she warns. "It'll crack." You fight a smirk. "So no emotions today." "Exactly," she says. "Like a lady?" As you sit there, stiff-faced and glossy, she brings out the pièce de résistance, a face mask made from egg whites, ground barley, and finely chopped mint. It's cool, gooey, and smells like breakfast. She spreads it evenly across your face, avoiding the eyes, then sits back on her heels, satisfied. "There," she says, "now you're perfect. You look in the mirror, you resemble a pastry, but beneath the absurdity is something strange and comforting. The rituals may be odd, even revolting at times, but they are slow, intentional. They force you to pause, to sit still, to be tended to. Outside your window, the courtyard bustles. Ladies and servants scurry about, caught in their own battles, hemlines, deadlines, dowries. But here, your face, stiff with barley and bone powder, you are still, and oddly powerful. There's freedom in surrendering to absurdity. When it's time to remove the mask, Beatrix wipes it away with a cloth soaked in chamomile tea. The scent is soothing. The warmth seeps into your cheeks. She massages your skin with oil made from pressed violets and something unidentifiable that smells like pine needles and parchment. "You look like marble," she whispers. "You do. Smooth, pale, slightly shiny." You step out into the corridor, where several women pause and eye your face with something between envy and concern. "New treatment?" one asks cautiously. You nod. "Mice." She blinks. Brilliant. At lunch, someone leans in and says, "You look younger." Another says, "You look unnaturally serene." A third just says, "Is that mint I smell?" Beatrix beams behind you, but not everyone is impressed. One elder woman frowns from across the table. "In my day, we washed in cold water and thanked the saints for whatever face we got." You offer a polite smile. "In your day, perhaps the saints were more generous." There's a pause, then laughter. The truth is, medieval skincare was rarely just about vanity. It was part ritual, part prayer, part quiet resistance against decay, against time, against the world's tendency to bruise and weather whatever it touches. Back in your chamber, Beatrix applies one final balm to your lips, made from beeswax, crushed cherry skins, and something she insists is blessed salt. "What does that do?" you ask. She shrugs. "Probably nothing, but it feels nice." And it does. You climb into bed with your skin soft, tingling, slightly fragrant, and, yes, probably infused with the essence of 3 different rodents, but you feel cared for, tended, seen, and in this world that's a rare kind of luxury. Today is not about presentation, not entirely. You wake to Beatrix lighting a candle near your window, the flame flickering despite the closed shutters. She moves slowly with a kind of reverence, like the air itself has grown delicate. You sit up, already sensing a shift. "What's the occasion?" you ask. She doesn't answer right away. Instead, she holds up something carefully wrapped in muslin, a simple, slim rod of carved wood, its surface darkened with age and handling. "Time to blacken your teeth," she says softly. You blink. "On purpose?" She nods. "Today, you join the ranks of women who, at least in certain regions and eras, darkened their teeth intentionally, a strange, sometimes regional beauty standard with roots in everything from symbolism to status, from health to hierarchy." Beatrix begins by handing you a cup of warm vinegar and crushed gallnut, an astringent, sharp concoction meant to prep the teeth. You swish, you wince, you survive. Then she opens a tiny ceramic pot filled with a glossy paste made from soot, iron filings, and clove oil. She dips the brush, made from stiff horsehair, and begins painting the mixture carefully over each tooth. "Don't smile until it sets," she warns. You stare at your reflection. Your mouth looks reversed, as if someone turned off the lights behind your lips. But Beatrix is not joking. "It was common, especially in the East," she says. "In parts of Japan, it's still done for ceremony. It shows maturity, nobility, loyalty. In certain noble circles, even in pockets of medieval Europe, blackened teeth could suggest worldliness, wisdom, or even restraint. White teeth, surprisingly, were sometimes associated with youth, foolishness, or even immorality. A smile too bright might hint at poor self-control. Historians still argue whether European noblewomen adopted the practice directly or were inspired by exoticized tales from travelers and emissaries. But one thing is clear, beauty was never universal. It was fluid, defined by region, season, mood, monarch, or myth. Beatrix steps back. There. A mouth that keeps secrets. You attempt a cautious grin. The black sheen catches the candlelight, turning your smile into something more sculptural than expressive. You look composed, unreadable, and that's exactly what today requires. The gathering at court is formal, an audience with a visiting envoy from a far-off kingdom. You dress in deep blue velvet with silver stitching at the sleeves. A veil of sheer gauze covers your hair, and your mouth remains mostly closed, not in shame, but in poise. You sit, watchful. When spoken to, you answer softly, lips barely parting. When you smile, it's controlled, just a shadow of a grin. It draws people in, makes them wonder. It removes frivolity, replaces it with precision. Across the hall, a noblewoman from another house laughs loudly. Her teeth are pearly, radiant, and noticeable. Too much, too open. Someone nearby mutters, "She shows all her cards." You sit straighter. One knight leans toward you during a musical interlude. "Your smile," he says quietly, "feels like a secret I want to earn." You don't reply. You just hold his gaze and let the moment pass, like a coin placed on a shelf rather than spent. Later, at the feast, you sip only dark wine and chew only soft bread. Anything that might chip the polish, you avoid. One lady asks if your teeth are painted or naturally so refined. You let her guess. The servants speak of you too. You hear them whispering that your mouth is like a priest's vault or the doorway to a vow. The metaphors get stranger as the night deepens, but the point is clear. Blackened teeth mean something. They imply restraint, control, power without excess. When you return to your chamber, Beatrix wipes the polish away with a vinegar cloth. Your teeth underneath are unchanged, but they feel different, almost exposed. "Do you prefer them white?" she asks. You consider. "I prefer that they don't know," she smiles. "Very courtly of you." You rinse one last time with rosewater and salt. The aftertaste is bitter but clean, and you lie down that night with your lips relaxed, no longer stretching into easy grins or bright expressions. Because in this world, the softest features often guard the hardest truths. And sometimes the darkest smile is the most intentional one. The candlelight glows low and golden as Beatrix moves about the chamber, humming to herself while polishing the brass fastenings on a small wooden box. You're still tucked under the covers, blinking at the ceiling beams, when she places the box gently on your lap. Inside, dozens of tiny packets of herbs carefully labelled, neatly folded in linen, all smelling faintly of cloves, fennel, and old secrets. "Fasting today," she says. "Voluntary." You groan. "Isn't everything technically voluntary?" She arches a brow. "Not in your position." Today's regimen isn't for court. It's not for flirtation or formality. It's for fragility, not actual illness, but the appearance of it, that ever so popular courtly look of delicate wrists, pallid cheeks, and hollowed collarbones. The kind of beauty that suggests you might vanish in a soft breeze, but only after sighing dramatically near a window. Beatrix opens one of the sachets, dried violets and marjoram, and drops the mixture into a cup of warm water. "This will keep your stomach quiet," she says. "If you get dizzy, just lean elegantly." You sit up slowly, knowing what's ahead, because in this world, appetite is not just about food. It's about virtue and self-denial. That's the finest seasoning. Historians still argue about the role of fasting in medieval beauty culture. It was, of course, deeply spiritual, penance, purification, imitation of saints. But for noblewomen, it also became performance, a way to display piety and the physical frailty that was fashionable among the upper class. You weren't beautiful unless you looked like you subsisted on poetry and dew. Beatrix lays out your clothing for the day. A pale grey kirtle, modest in cut, light in fabric, loose around the waist. The sleeves are slightly too long. It'll make your hands look smaller, she explains. Do my hands need to look smaller? Always. You sip the herb water, which tastes like an abandoned garden, and skip breakfast entirely. By mid-morning, your stomach is making quiet objections, but your reflection is playing along nicely. Your face looks thinner, your eyes slightly larger. The hollows of your collarbones more pronounced under the sheer linen neckline. You walk slowly, partially for effect, partially to conserve energy. At the gathering in the solar, other ladies are also fasting. One picks at a single grape, another drinks only barley water. You all talk about music, embroidery, and who's been seen weeping in the chapel. The usual. Someone murmurs that Lady Eleanor hasn't eaten in 2 days. Another says she's being watched by a monk to ensure she doesn't die too beautifully. You chew one candied violet and let the sugar melt slowly. Later, in the garden, you rest beneath a carved stone arch, while a scribe reads aloud from a poem about a woman so light she floated above the river, untouchable and holy. You try not to think about how good a warm meat pie would taste right now. Beatrix finds you around noon, holding out another cup. This one has a little time, she says, to keep your legs from shaking. You down it quickly. By late afternoon, you feel light, drifty, hollowed out, but not unpleasantly so. Every movement is quieter, every word slower. Your entire body has taken on the softness of parchment. Even the steward lowers his voice when speaking to you. You look, he says, like a candle just before it gutters. You smile faintly. That's the goal. In the corridor, one young man nearly walks into a wall watching you pass. Another trips on a stair. You pretend not to notice. It's the fragility, the illusion of near collapse. No one wants a woman who charges into a room, but one who might faint into your arms. Irresistible. Back in your chamber, Beatrix helps you remove your kirtle. You sit on the bench while she rubs lavender balm into your wrists, murmuring, "That will distract from the smell of vinegar tea." You nod, grateful. "You made it all day," she says. "Barely." She grins. "Exactly." Because in this performance, barely is the badge, the trembling sigh, the pale wrist offered just so. The absence of food becomes presence of virtue. Hunger becomes holiness. You lie in bed, belly still whispering questions your lips won't answer. Beatrix blows out the candle. The room falls into quiet. And you drift off, wondering if tomorrow, just maybe, you'll eat. Or maybe you'll sip broth and let your cheekbones do the talking. A storm rolls in just after dawn. Not a wild one, no thunder, no wind that tears at shutters, but a slow, sullen rain that darkens the stone walls and softens every sound. You wake to the patter on the slate roof and the scent of damp linen rising from the floor. Beatrix arrives with a bundle of fabric in her arms, her own sleeves slightly soaked. "Perfect day for invisibility," she says. You sit up, curious. Invisibility? She tosses the bundle on your bed. It's not a gown, it's a wimple, and a veil, and a gorget, and a surcoat so plain and stiff it might have been cut from the idea of fabric rather than fabric itself. Today you're learning the art of erasure through clothing. You're being dressed not to stand out, but to vanish. Or rather, to flatten. To become untouchable by removing anything that might draw attention, for better or worse. "It's a discipline," Beatrix says, pinning the veil beneath your chin, "to wear what speaks nothing." And so you do, layer after layer, all in muted browns and greys. The linen is coarse, the wool itches. There are no jewels, no ribbons, no colour, save for a pale embroidered border of ivy leaves, more texture than flourish. She binds your hair tightly, every strand tucked, not a wisp in sight. The wimple covers your neck, the gorget hugs your collar. Even your shoulders vanish under the straight lines of the surcoat. By the time she's finished, you don't look like you at all. You look like a suggestion. And that, in many medieval circles, was the point. Historians still argue whether these layers were about modesty, class conformity, or sheer practicality. But in many monastic and noble households, intentional plainness was a beauty in itself, a power move of silence and restraint. You descend the stairs slowly, and already people treat you differently. Servants glance and quickly look away. The steward asks if you're in mourning. A young page blinks at you as if uncertain whether to bow or apologize. Even Beatrix walks a step behind today, her usual chatter dialed to a hush. You attend the chapel service and sit near the back, your hands folded in your lap, your veil hanging low. The incense is thick and sweet, the candlelight paints halos on stone columns, and in your quiet uniform you feel curiously large, not in size, but in presence, because when nothing draws the eye, when you strip away allure, jewelry, perfume, charm, what remains has gravity. A nun brushes past and whispers, "You look like a saint I once prayed to." You glance at her, expression still, and do not reply. Later in the courtyard, two noblewomen pass by and nod politely, unsure whether you're a cousin of the abbess or a particularly devout aunt visiting from a far-off priory. Beatrix watches them go. "You're untouchable today," she says. "Very unpopular, very powerful." You smirk beneath your veil. There is something subversive in dressing this way. As if by removing femininity, you sharpen its edge. As if restraint, carried far enough, becomes the loudest statement in the room. You spend the afternoon copying verses in the scriptorium. The scratch of quill on parchment, the smell of ink and vellum. It's a quiet day. No flirtations, no flounces, no eyes lingering on your waist or neck. And yet, when a knight walks in to deliver a message, he stops short at the sight of you. He clears his throat. I didn't realize there were holy women present." You glance up, say nothing, and he bows awkwardly, retreating as if scorched by proximity. Later, Beatrix brings you a thin broth and slices of barley bread. "No one knows what to make of you today," she says, setting the tray down, and that unnerves them. "Good," you murmur, dipping bread into the bowl. "Let them guess." That night, as she helps you out of the layers, unwraps the veil, unbuttons the collar, loosens the ties, you breathe a little deeper. The skin beneath your jaw tingles with freedom. Your hair spills down in waves, and when you look in the mirror, there you are again, but not all of you. Some parts stayed behind in the folds of the wool, in the creases of silence, in the tension of being unseen on purpose. It's a strange kind of beauty, the kind that leaves others questioning their eyes, the kind that doesn't ask to be admired, only remembered later, when the candles are out and the rooms are still. It begins with a knock, not the kind of knock that demands attention, but a soft, polite tap just before sunrise. Beatrix answers the door while you're still blinking away sleep. A servant stands there with a folded note and a small parcel wrapped in dark green silk. "A gift," he murmurs, bowing. Beatrix waits until he's gone, then opens it carefully on your table. Inside, a thin ivory comb carved with vines, and a scrap of parchment bearing only 4 words, penned in elegant script. "The neck tells everything." You raise an eyebrow. Beatrix snorts. "Someone's being dramatic." Today's lesson? The language of the neck, because while the eyes may be windows and the lips may speak, it is the neck, its exposure, adornment, posture, that revealed everything in medieval court culture. Desire, status, illness, defiance, all of it silently anchored between chin and shoulder. You bathe slowly, the water warm from the morning fire, then sit while Beatrix applies lavender oil along your collarbones. She brushes your hair back tightly from your face, twisting it into a high knot that leaves your neck completely bare. "Too bare?" you ask. She shakes her head. "Not if you want someone to worry about you all day." The neckline of today's gown dips lower than usual, not scandalous by modern standards, but certainly a whisper lower than yesterday's modest cut. It's enough to draw the eye to the hollow between your clavicles. Enough to suggest a touch of fragility or allure. You walk through the corridor and you feel it. Eyes land there first. Not your smile, not your hands, your throat. In medieval courts, this part of the body was where rules were bent subtly. A woman could be entirely covered, veiled, gloved, and still reveal vulnerability or strength by how she tilted her chin, how she exposed the slope of her neck, how her collar drew the gaze like a path. Historians still debate whether these stylings were learned consciously or emerged through mimicry and tradition. But portraits, letters, and accounts from the time make one thing clear. People noticed necks and drew conclusions quickly. That mole, exotic. That sunburn, rural. That necklace worn slightly askew, intentional rebellion. Today you wear no jewelry, just bare skin dabbed with rosewater and a powder so fine it looks like moonlight on vellum. You feel exposed, but also in control. Beatrix hands you a fan. In case you want to look overwhelmed, she says, grinning. Fanning the neck is very effective. At court, you sit with your shoulders straight, your chin lowered just enough to make others lean in. A poet begins reciting verses near the hearth, but his eyes keep flicking toward your collar. Someone murmurs to him, "Careful, her eyes might be listening." Later, as you move through the hall, a rival glances at your neckline and smirks. She adjusts her own collar upward, defensive. You say nothing, but Beatrix whispers, "Victory." In the garden, a nobleman attempts conversation, but he can't stop watching the hollow of your throat as you drink from a pewter cup. When he finally speaks, it's to ask if you're cold. You aren't, but you let your voice come out soft and low. "A little." He immediately offers his cloak. It's not about seduction, not really. It's about command, the neck as a stage, whether bowed in submission, tilted in flirtation, or lifted in challenge. You've seen how queens carry it like a sword, how novices cloak it like a vow, how widows hide it like a wound. Each gesture carries volumes. Later, alone in your chamber, you examine yourself in the looking glass, not out of vanity but curiosity. You tilt your head to one side, then the other. In this light, you see the outline of tendons, the shadow beneath the jaw, the slight pulse beneath the skin, all the things no rouge or ribbon could ever fake. Beatrix brings in a final balm, camphor and fig sap, to cool the skin after the day's exposure. She applies it gently, then wraps your shoulders in a fine linen shawl. "You said the neck tells everything," you murmur. She nods. "And it listens too." You lie back in bed, shawl still draped over your shoulders, the scent of rosewater rising faintly in the dark. Your head rests on the pillow, tilted just enough to feel the softness of fabric against your throat. And as you drift off, it occurs to you, in a world obsessed with voices and masks and painted smiles, it's the neck, the quietest part of the body, that often tells the loudest story. You wake to a grey sky and the scent of beeswax polish. The shutters are half open. Rain has passed in the night, leaving behind a softness in the air, a hush. Beatrix is already tidying the chamber, folding linens, muttering about moths. She pauses to glance at you and smiles. "Today's the day we craft your shadow." You blink. "My what?" She gestures toward a basket of fabric, threads, brushes, and, unexpectedly, a pot of soot. "It's time for your portrait." Ah, the medieval portrait, less a reflection, more an announcement, less "how do I look?" and more "how should I be remembered?" Today, you're not just being painted, you're being composed. And what that portrait says about you, what you're wearing, how you're standing, where your hands are placed, will echo through time, long after the smell of turpentine fades. Beatrix lays out your gown. It's not the most extravagant one you own, but it's deliberate. Deep crimson velvet, with fur trim at the sleeves and a stiff bodice that forces your posture into perfect regality. The neckline is square, framed with a narrow braid of gold thread. Modest, but striking. "You'll be sitting," Beatrix says, tightening your corset laces, "but you must still look like you command gravity." And so begins your most carefully controlled appearance yet. In the painter's studio, the light is diffused through oiled parchment windows, casting a pale glow on every surface. The artist himself, a man with nimble fingers and a distracted gaze, nods at you as you enter. "No smile," he says immediately. "That's not fashionable." You were warned. Medieval portraits were solemn affairs. The point was not to look friendly but immortal. Expressions too lively were considered frivolous or worse, unstable. You sit, straight, still, one hand folded over the other, chin level, eyes forward. Beatrix adjusts your veil slightly, then wipes a non-existent smudge from your sleeve. The painter begins sketching, muttering under his breath as he maps your face in faint, charcoal lines. Every detail he captures or omits will become part of your historical myth. Historians still argue about how much input women had in their own portraits during this time. Some accounts suggest complete control over clothing and composition. Others hint that male relatives, husbands, or patrons dictated everything from palette to posture. What's certain is that each element was laden with meaning. Take your crimson gown, for instance. Red often symbolized power, wealth, even virtue. Strange as that may sound to modern ears. The fur, nobility. The tight bodice, chastity, self-discipline. And the lack of jewelry, that's its own statement. Restraint, focus, perhaps even mourning. The artist tilts his head, squints at your face. "You've a good neck for this work," he murmurs. "Strong but not proud." You resist the urge to blink. He mixes pigments, lead white, vermilion, ochre, grinds them with linseed oil and begins applying paint to the wooden panel. The scent of it mingles with the wax of the candles, the faint tang of your rosewater balm. Time passes strangely in the studio. You lose track of hours. Your spine aches, your legs go numb. Your face begins to itch in places you can't scratch. But through it all, you maintain the stillness of a carved saint, because this isn't just art. This is strategy. A visual whisper to the world. This is who I was. This is how I mattered. At one point, the painter pauses and asks if you'd like a small object added, an emblem perhaps to hint at a virtue. You think for a moment, then shake your head. "No emblem," you say. "Let the silence do the talking." Beatrix beams. When the initial session ends, the painter covers the panel with a cloth and bows. "It will dry slowly," he says. "Layers upon layers, weeks of work." You nod politely. But inside something stirs, because the idea that this painted you, this version made of brushstrokes and choices, will survive long after your dust, it's unsettling and thrilling. Later, back in your chamber, Beatrix helps you out of the gown. She lays it gently across the bed, then runs a comb through your hair. "Do you think they'll remember me?" you ask quietly. She smiles without hesitation. "They'll remember exactly who you told them to." And that's the trick, isn't it? Not truth, not falsity, but curation. You've crafted a legacy, not just through words or deeds, but through fabric, expression, posture, a living self distilled into myth. As you settle into bed that night, spine still stiff from hours of posing, you imagine future eyes gazing at your portrait, wondering who you were. You smile just a little, and hope they never guessed the joke you were holding back the whole time. The morning sun creeps through the shutters like honey. Slow, golden, reluctant. Today, you're told, is a day of public grace. A festival, a feast, an opportunity to be seen, not just looked at, but witnessed. And in the medieval world, that is everything. Visibility isn't merely about fashion or posture anymore. It's about movement, about how you glide through a space, how your presence ripples through the hall. It's a theatre, and you are both actor and stage. Beatrix sets down a tray of stewed apples and toasted oatcakes. "You'll need strength today," she says. "No fainting unless it's strategic." You eat slowly, chewing on her words more than the food. In the wardrobe chamber, garments are already laid out like instruments before a performance. A blue damask gown with long trailing sleeves, nearly to the ground, embroidered shoes, A girdle that cinches just enough to suggest restraint without hardship. And most notably, a headpiece that demands its own weather system. Ah, the hennin, that tall, conical hat with a sheer veil cascading from its tip. Part fashion, part architecture. The medieval version of "Don't talk to me unless you're titled." Beatrix balances it on your head with a reverence normally reserved for sacred relics. "You look," she whispers, "like a sermon made of silk." You laugh, but carefully. The hennin wobbles if you're not precise. Historians still debate whether these towering headpieces were merely style choices or meant to reinforce a woman's noble stature, literally elevating her above common heads. What's certain is that they were impossible to ignore. And that's what today is about. At court, music echoes through vaulted ceilings. Minstrels pluck lutes, dancers whirl, platters of roasted pheasant and spiced figs are passed around, but you barely taste a bite. You're too busy playing the role you've been dressing for all month. You enter the hall slowly, carefully, allowing the hennin to tilt slightly backward so the veil trails like smoke. People part as you move, partly out of deference, partly to avoid getting their eyes poked. You pause near the tapestries, not posing, of course, but standing with enough stillness to be noticed. Your hands rest lightly on your girdle. You gaze forward with soft detachment, the way saints gaze in stained glass, and just like that, you become a presence. You don't need to speak. Your body does the talking. Every choice communicates: the blue gown, dignity; the long sleeves, modesty; the hennin, status; the calm expression, self-mastery. This is visual rhetoric, and you are fluent. One knight spills his goblet while glancing your way. A young lady adjusts her own headpiece higher. Even the steward bows slightly deeper than usual. Later in the gardens, a group gathers around you to discuss court matters. You speak sparingly, just enough to remain mysterious. A poet offers to write a verse in your honor. You respond with a faint smile and an even fainter shrug. "Make it short," you say. "I'm not very interesting." They laugh, of course. But they also remember. By evening, torches are lit along the cloisters. Shadows stretch long on the flagstones. The feast turns to music and storytelling. You sit near the hearth, veil now shimmering in the firelight, eyes half-lidded with careful boredom, because that too is a performance. To appear gently unimpressed, as if grandeur is your natural habitat and nothing can surprise you anymore. Beatrix appears behind you, whispering, "The painter came by. He says your portrait is drying well. He's already been asked if you're available for marriage negotiations." You roll your eyes. "Did he mention my impeccable neck?" "No," she smirks, "but he mentioned your lack of jewelry, said it spoke volumes." As the night wanes and you climb the stairs to your chamber, the hennin tucked under your arm like a collapsed tent, you reflect on the oddity of it all. How performance has become truth. How a month of shaping your appearance, your clothes, posture, speech, even your stillness has made people see something they never would have otherwise. You crafted, you curated, you composed like a painting and worn like a rumour. In your chamber, Beatrix begins unfastening the layers. "You've learned to be visible without words," she says, "to be unforgettable, even in silence." You nod, slowly, watching your reflection in the mirror. The veil, the gown, the lines left on your skin from tight lacing. And you realize this wasn't just about medieval beauty, it was about power. In a world where women were often dismissed, appearance was agency. Subtle, strategic, sometimes uncomfortable, often underestimated, but real. And tonight, when you lie back on the linen sheets, eyes fluttering closed to the sound of wind outside your window, you feel it settle into your bones. You've made them look, and looking, they remembered. You sleep late. For the first time in weeks, no knock, no hurried rustle of fabric, no Beatrix insisting on urgency. Just the warm hush of linen against skin, the filtered gold of morning through high-set windows, and your own breath rising in steady, unhurried rhythm. When you finally stir, it's with the weight of everything you've worn, shed, performed, and endured these past days. Your body remembers it all, the corset's grip, the veil's tickle, the sore heels from ceremonial shoes. But more than that, your mind carries the deeper imprint, what it meant to wear history. Beatrix appears eventually barefoot and carrying 2 mugs of honeyed tea. She's in a simple shift today, no corset, no sleeves, no posture to maintain. You've graduated, she says with a grin. No more gowns, no more gazes, just you. And it feels strange, because today there is nothing to perform, no shadow to cast, no rumour to sculpt. Just you and the strange quiet of not being watched. You sip your tea slowly, staring out the window as the courtyard bustles below, others preparing, dressing, performing the roles you've temporarily retired from. You're no longer the canvas, no longer the statue or spectacle. You're the one who now knows, and that is a very different kind of beauty. Beatrix braids your hair loosely, just for the comfort of it. You walk barefoot along the gallery, unpainted and unseen, watching others who now try on what you wore so recently. A girl in a too-bright dress hurries past, veil slipping, cheeks pink with nerves. You smile at her gently, you remember being her, but you also know the calm that comes after the performance ends. And this calm is rich, because every little detail, from the goose-fat balm to the rib-piercing corset, from the rigid hennin to the quiet authority of bare shoulders, all of it formed a map, a roadmap of medieval womanhood, a handbook of strategic visibility. You remember the painted saints with impossible fingers, the potions made of mint and mud, the rituals, the starches, the powdered lead and beetle dye, the perfumes brewed like secrets. You remember what it meant to dress for silence, what it cost to stand straight, what it earned to say nothing and still be heard. Historians still debate whether these beauty practices were acts of oppression or tools of agency. And you understand now both can be true. A tightened bodice can restrict or command. A layer of powder can erase or declare. A veil can conceal or protect. It all depends on who's wearing it and why. By mid-afternoon, you and Beatrix walk the gardens, now in their late summer bloom. Roses have opened beyond their ideal, petals just starting to curl. Bees float heavy through the air. You sit on a low stone bench and let the wind loosen your braid. There is a boy feeding crumbs to birds on the lawn, a girl balancing a basket on her head, trying not to wobble, a noblewoman instructing a seamstress to hem her gown an inch higher, just high enough to suggest movement, she says, loud enough for passers-by to hear. You smile again. The world is a stage, but it's also a mirror. And today, finally, it reflects you, not your garments, not your posture, but the knowledge you carry inside your own skin, the quiet confidence of having seen how the game is played and knowing when to sit it out. That night, as you prepare for sleep, Beatrix offers you a soft robe and a simple comb. No more paint, you ask? No need, she replies. Tonight, the moon will do the work. You lie back on the bed, eyes closed, feeling the sheets cool against your bare arms. The candle flickers low, and in that flicker you see it all again. The gowns, the powder, the portrait, the girls laughing behind fans, the old women watching from shadows, the prayers whispered over corsets, the bruises hidden under gloves, the power written in lace, and finally, yourself, layer by layer, each removed gently, folded away, until only stillness remains. So now, as your breathing slows and the last echoes of distant footsteps fade from your imagination, let yourself return slowly, softly, from the stone halls and velvet gowns. You've wandered through a world where appearances were armor, where every curl and collar and cloth carried silent weight. But tonight, here in this quiet place between waking and sleep, none of that matters. You are not your posture. You are not your powder. You are not the corset or the veil, the blush or the braid. You are the hush underneath it all, the deep, steady self that watches, waits, and finally rests. Let that weight lift. Let the performance dissolve. Let your breath become the softest rhythm in the room, like wind through linen curtains, like distant footsteps across flagstones, like a forgotten harp string still vibrating somewhere far away. Feel your jaw loosen, your shoulders sink, your eyes soften behind closed lids. There's no need to hold the pose anymore. You've already been seen, and more importantly, you've seen yourself. So breathe in and out. Let the stories drift. Let the names and gowns and powders blur into the backdrop of sleep. You've done enough. You've worn enough. You've been enough. Now the world goes quiet, and you do too. Good night. Sleep well. Sweet dreams.